It's so good to have everybody here. I'm glad you could be here. And here comes Jim. Beautiful. All right.
Hey,
How you doing, Jim?
not bad. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Let me
Pull
make it so
this
that
up a
everybody
little
can
bit.
see you here. That should do it. All right. Excellent. Yeah.
Oh, do I need to turn sound down? I'm hearing a delay.
I think you're probably hearing my audio through Twitch, so if you close that window or mute it, that should get rid of the echo, I think.
Okay, let me.
Yeah. Live broadcast, everybody. This is how it always
Uh,
goes.
okay.
Uh, hmm.
Oops, where'd you go?
Okay. I'm still here.
Okay, there we go. All right,
Excellent. Yeah. Everybody
there we go.
who might not be familiar, this is Dr. Jim Kirkland, Utah's state paleontologist. He's joining us from I guess the Department of Natural Resources building in Salt Lake City,
Oh,
Utah, right?
actually, I'm at home in my
Oh,
office.
oh, okay, nice. Yeah, you've got similar books back in your office in
Oh,
both places, it seems.
yeah, that's my problem. I've got to keep my office. I can't, if I retired, I don't know what I'd do with my library.
Right. No space at home. Yeah.
Not, I've got a lot of books.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself first, Jim, for anybody in the audience who
Sure.
might not be super familiar with you? How'd you get your start in paleo, and how'd you get this gig with the state of Utah?
Well, I started, my interest started when I was 5 years old.
Uh huh.
And my dad brought home a Mark set of toy dinosaurs in 1959 uh, in the old vacuum pack. Probably cost him 49 cents or something back then. You get them, and in the vacuum pack, probably worth thousands now. It would have been a good investment to buy a bunch of those. But anyway, got me, hooked up into dinosaurs, a little kid. I was a little dino geek in the neighborhood. And telling her, oh, I'm going to be a paleontologist when I grow up. And lo and behold, here I am.
Yeah.
Been doing paleontology, chasing dinosaurs for more than 50 years now in the Colorado Plateau region.
Right.
And had a chance to work in the Gobi and in China, multiple trips to China and Spain, done a lot of work in Spain. Pretty much sticking to the northern hemisphere. Tried to do an Argentina trip, but it fell through, unfortunately. Actually, I had
Yeah.
two different trips to Argentina fall through, but it's pretty far field for what I'm doing here.
Oh
There's
yeah.
no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, uh, but been doing this for a long time. Hunting various dinosaurs. I'm best known for, of course, Utah Raptor.
Mm-hmm.
The real star of Jurassic Park. Sorry, Stephen. Uh, but I've been very fortunate with the stuff I've found. 'Cause, I've found almost two. Well, I found well over 2 dozen new dinosaurs,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm almost at 2 dozen that I've taken part in naming. It's
Nice.
hard to actually earn your salary, which is usually involved in other things.
Right.
Uh, and name dinosaurs and do all the stuff that I like and the public likes. But
Mm-hmm.
as state paleontologist, I issue permits. I'm looking at projects all over the state. We're getting ready in the next 6 weeks, supposedly, opening Utah Raptor State Park, officially having the ribbon cutting for the Utah Raptor State Park, which is taking some of my attention lately.
Right.
Krista Sadler's book on the Cedar Mountain Formation should be out in the next month or two, next
Oh
couple
man.
months.
Yeah.
It's looking really good. Andrea Atucha did a wraparound cover art
I saw that
based
cover art. It's
on.
gorgeous. Yeah, I'm so excited
Uh,
for this, Jim. We're
oh
gonna see if
yeah,
we can bring Krista on for an interview like this before the book drops, and
Yeah.
encourage people to call their local libraries, get copies there,
Oh
all that
yeah,
stuff.
I know.
Yeah.
It's a stellar book. I'm really excited about it. And I remember when Krista was saying, who should I get to write the forward to this thing?
Hmm.
I'm like, well, you might talk to Dave Norman. Dave's
Right.
been over. He tried to do a thing at the Smithsonian to work with us,
Hmm.
except the Smithsonian wouldn't fund him to come out and work with us in Utah. He was pretty ticked off, and he's told me it felt like almost a waste of a year of his time doing
Hmm.
that year in the Smithsonian, because he did it as a leap to work with us in Utah.
Hmm.
But the Smithsonian doesn't do a lot of field work, as we all know,
Right.
which is unfortunate. But Dave wrote the foreword, and it's pretty nice, because when it comes to the early Cretaceous and someone whose work I followed a long time, Dave Norman is one of those guys.
Right.
So I'm really,
Me
really
too.
pleased that he was willing to do the forward
Yeah. Yeah. Shoot,
for that
his
book.
dinosaurs encyclopedia was a humongous influence on me when I was a kid. Um, got that right here.
Oh,
This is yeah, from the
oh
early
yeah, I used to
'80s.
use it on my digs, because
Yep.
you could go through and find pictures of almost any bone you're going to find.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
and that's another one where Dave is like, they did a second edition,
Uh huh.
and Dave wanted to update it, and they said, we
Uh huh.
don't need to. We're not going to update it. So he was pretty ticked off at him that they
Yeah.
wouldn't update the book. He's going, there's whole groups, spinosaurs and things have been discovered.
Therizinosaurs. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he has therizinosaurs in there
Yep.
as
A
but as
miscellaneous theropod.
yeah,
Yeah.
miscellaneous theropod.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean,
I always
it's
tell people there will never be another book like this
yeah,
ever
no,
published,
it's
just because there's too much nowadays. You could never
no,
have
they
a
could
book
they
that's
could
this
do it. It'd be a
comprehensive.
bit thicker, but keep that real terse,
I guess.
format that it's got. No, they could do it. I mean, I'm absolutely convinced of it.
Yeah.
Just having all the skeletal drawings and a whole bit. No, you
If
expand
that
it to
if
include some other
there are ever
groups.
whispers of that happening, Jim, let me know because I'd love to
Purdue.
be involved.
I
Anyway,
just like to get a copy of it.
yeah, oh for sure, yeah.
I
No,
mean, it's always been a useful reference for me to quickly get across something to the
yep,
public.
yeah.
The people walking
Still,
to my
even
office
like
aren't dinosaur experts typically.
we're coming up on I think almost 40, 50 years since it's been published. It was what, like
Something like that.
1983, something like that. So yeah.
Yeah, it was in the
Um,
90s. I think they did the second edition, and
oh, okay.
like zero change. I mean, it's
Right.
like,
Yeah.
why do you call it a second edition? Reprint.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I have that one too, and it is exactly the same. Zero
exactly
changes.
the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dave wasn't happy. He was not happy.
We had
He could fix some things.
somebody in the chat, Ruiz Mario says, Jim, I'm a giant fan of Utah Raptor. I legitimately sculpted a full-size Utah Raptor skull. Honestly, your
Mhm.
research has been a giant inspiration for me. So,
Well,
uh,
thanks. I mean, that's why we're doing this for. If the public did not care about what we did, none of us would be doing what we do.
yep, yeah, we
It's
wouldn't have jobs.
you know,
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. I mean,
Hmm.
we are, it's so funny, the bureaucracy, because I work for the state of Utah.
Hmm.
Of course, I've got supporters, in the state of Utah that know the good I do relative to PR, but it's a very different kind of thing that we're doing here. In terms of where does Utah benefit from this? Tourism and the
Absolutely.
museums, and
Yeah.
we have one of the best records of this stuff anywhere on the planet.
Hmm.
And we have a tendency to look at what we have in our backyard as well. This everybody's got this as not important.
Mm.
So people will talk about dinosaurs in China,
Uh-huh.
as more significantly than they talk about here. Of course, China throws 100 times more
Oh
money
yeah.
than we
Lots
do
of support for
in
paleontology
this
in China.
country.
Yeah.
But basically, we have a better record in Utah
When you say
with
that we have a
better
better record,
data.
what do you mean? Can you explain that for anybody who's
Well, the
unfamiliar with?
record,
Yeah.
we don't have the yet. I've got a site. I still think we'll get a feathered dinosaur eventually,
Oh.
but the lake, Lake Carpenter,
Uh-huh.
is, we're going to get feathers there someday, and who knows, it may be in 100 years. We don't pay people a couple bucks a day to quarry dinosaurs for us.
Right.
So you
Yeah.
get armies of people, and doing that stuff by hand is the only way you find that kind of stuff. You know, but basically, in terms of the entire Mesozoic, and in terms of really the whole history of multicellular life,
Uh-huh.
I mean, our Cambrian, our stuff over much older than the dinosaur record out in the West Desert is, as good as anything on the planet. I mean, we got 4 different Burgess Shale quality levels in our West Desert, going through the middle Cambrian into the basal part of the upper Cambrian with Anomalocaris and all these soft-bodied critters preserved. And, we just have an extraordinary stuff. Our Ordovician reef systems out
Right.
there, Fossil Mountain, its name is appropriate. It's just,
Yeah.
these are all things that in other countries would be national parks, just for their own right. I mean, all the big, Lagerstättens, in China and Canada, even North Africa, Niger, they're national parks,
Hmm.
Utah, whatever. Who cares about a bunch of trilobites? I mean, it's one of our incredible resources that we barely exploit. We got
Hmm.
National Monument. What more do you need? We have the complete record for Mesozoic, for dinosaurs.
Uh-huh.
We're in the terrestrial record, the things that lived on land. And
Right.
because of mountain building at the end of the Paleozoic in Colorado and eastern Utah, shedding sediment west through the whole first half of the age of dinosaurs, we've got a record of all those animals before the dinosaurs and during the origin of dinosaurs and their eventual takeover.
Hmm.
And then we have a period of quiescence, but that's our Morrison. That's the most famous stuff we got. And then mountains built up in western Utah and shed sediment to the east. And because of that seesaw of sediment being shed from the east to the west, or from the west to the east, we end up with a complete record of the age of dinosaurs.
Right.
And
Yeah.
at this point, I think we're up to 33 plus faunas. That's
Nice.
like, think of the Morrison as a fauna, the Hell Creek
Uh-huh.
as a fauna.
Right.
33 plus, and we're finding new faunas all the time. For the Cretaceous, we have the 5 oldest Cretaceous faunas
Hmm.
anywhere in North America.
Right.
They're
Yeah. In
all
the
in
Cedar Mountains.
Grand County, Utah. you
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
only.
So
This
for
amazing record that we have there.
many of the people
For the dawn
watching,
of the Cretaceous.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. We were talking about you. You were there when we were talking about the dawn of the Cretaceous, national
Oh
fossil
yeah.
beds. This whole idea, and if anybody, you know, here in the audience has watched our fieldwork in Utah, those are maybe the oldest Cretaceous rocks in North America, right? That we were digging in, and
With
the oldest
with
Cretaceous
fossils in them, with
dinosaurs.
dinosaurs. I mean, those are bone beds.
Yeah,
So you're
exactly.
looking at stuff that's like Dinosaur National. That area is 20 hectares. Something that's a
Hmm.
huge. The whole bottom of that valley is
Right.
covered with skeletons. We do have a somewhat older level that actually may be even in the Jurassic Cretaceous boundary. That's associated with those iron-rich paleosols.
Uh-huh.
That's closer to Utah Raptor Ridge,
Okay.
but they're more scattered. It's not as dense a bone bed. But this
Hmm.
is within a couple million years of the base of
Right.
the Cretaceous. So we're seeing what is the recovery following the mass extinction of our famous Morrison dinosaur fauna.
Uh-huh.
That we have the only record that exists of that recovery of that mass extinction.
Right. Yeah. So if we want to
I
figure out what
mean,
happened at the end of the Jurassic and why these dinosaurs disappeared, this is kind of the one hole in the fence that we can peek through in order to
oh
be able
yeah,
to.
we
Yeah.
never knew. We always had a 20 million year gap almost anywhere in the globe.
Uh-huh.
Of this stuff. And now we have this window through it and realize it's totally different. It's not just a turnover gradually from the Jurassic dinosaur assemblages, faunas, so we start seeing Cretaceous ones of the later early Cretaceous. No,
Hmm.
it's like boom, there's like nothing left. And
Right.
we're getting new things, and the things that are related to the dinosaurs in the Morrison, like the couple of sauropods that we have, the long necked dinosaurs, they apparently are coming in from Europe. We killed all the long necked dinosaurs off in North America, and they end up getting repopulated
Hmm.
from stuff in Europe. We got paleoclimate data now from the bottom of the Cretaceous that shows that the climate was extraordinarily wet for a short period of time.
Right.
We think that's because of flood basalts, maybe tied to an asteroid impact blowing through the oceanic crust in the Pacific,
Uh-huh.
not that far off the western side of North America at the time.
Huh.
This whole huge shield volcano, biggest shield volcano in the solar system, is now a lot closer to Japan because of continental drift, plate tectonics.
Uh-huh.
But when it hit, it was a lot closer to the western part of the US at the end of the Jurassic.
Uh-huh.
So it's like, okay, a lot. I mean, there'll be decades of work, figuring out what's exactly going on. But
Really
it
exciting.
would account for this incredible interval of rainfall.
Mm-hmm.
Suppose the mantle, you blow through 10 miles of oceanic crust and expose the mantle over, an area 100 miles across. We're
Uh-huh.
not talking like a little hole. We're talking punching a major hole through
Right.
the ocean floor into the molten outer, mantle, the
Mm-hmm.
source of our volcanic system. And that might be what pumped all this water into the atmosphere
That'd make a lot of
to
sense.
give
Create
us
a lot of
this
vapor.
interval of extraordinary rainfall that we're seeing.
Uh-huh.
This is like these are all discoveries in the last year or two that we're starting to make. It's starting to be like dominoes as
Mm-hmm.
we've been getting into this, realizing we've got a story here, and we need experts from multiple fields:
Right.
geophysics, geochemistry. It's not just paleontology to decipher the story.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different disciplines that need to come together. But the hypothesis is out there, and there's legs of support for it, which is real interesting. But we certainly need to build a wall of
It's
support,
it's really
solid
exciting to see
foundation.
this at its beginning stages, like this is
Oh
still a new
yeah,
idea, it's still gathering evidence. It's honestly, Jim, it's really, really cool being able to see this scientific process at the very outset,
yeah.
just
When
at
you
the
were out
very
last
beginning of
summer,
it,
we were barely talking about it. Like Mark
right?
Wigan, maybe. Now I'm thinking Shanxi, your eyes, the Shield volcano
Uh-huh.
might be a more important player than the Morquegan crater in northern South Africa. That's a
Huh.
big asteroid impact that hit the continent, crystalline rocks there at about the
Right.
same time. In fact, there might have been a cluster of these things that came in then.
Hmm.
Not individually as big as Chicxulub, but a little shower of these things coming in. But I think the one that would, if that thing is an impact causing
Mm-hmm.
this giant shield volcano,
Right.
uh, that would have, I think, more an effect than the one that hit the crystalline center of a continent.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure.
the Chicxulub crater hit a giant barrier reef system and
Mm-hmm.
evaporated over 100 miles of like the Great Barrier Reef with
Right.
big salt deposits behind it. So sulfate, carbonate into the atmosphere in intense volumes. That would, that's about as bad a place as you could do it,
Mm-hmm.
is where it hit off the Yucatan. But of the two that, I think might be two things that are good size, the one that hit the ocean was probably worse than the one that hit on the continent. I
Would
wouldn't
make
want to live
sense.
in
Oceanic
the
crust tends to
neighborhood.
be thinner, right?
Yeah, it's much thinner. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. This thing, they've
and more
drilled in
dense.
Merquegan and found, half-meter chunks of the meteor.
Right. Yeah.
So there's no question what that one is, and the melted rock they've dated. Shanxi is trickier to deal with because it's in the ocean,
Mm-hmm.
and it's miles thick.
Mm-hmm.
What was deposited, what was formed. So they've never been able to drill all the way through to see what its root. All they're looking at is, seismic data,
Mm-hmm.
to try to reconstruct the structure. That's why they now think it's a giant shield volcano and not just a flood
Right.
basalt plateau.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so that's a real. When I first heard shield volcano, I had to call a couple of my friends that are more in the ocean drilling program end of this science. It's like,
Uh-huh.
what do you know? What do you know about Shanxi? Oh, the shield volcano. I'm like, so that is, what people are thinking.
Yeah,
Because when I
interesting.
first read that, I was like, what? Bigger than Olympus Mons? Why haven't I heard of this?
Jeez.
I mean,
Yeah. Exciting stuff. Yeah. So
no, it
hopefully that
is.
gives
I love it. I wish I was younger.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Hopefully
mean,
that
some
gives
of
the
this stuff's going
viewers
to take decades to really build the scientific foundations
Hmm.
to really see what's going on. We now know something went on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just that was a big revelation that I'm pretty proud of.
Exactly. Yeah. I was going to say that hopefully this kind of goes to show the viewers not just how much dinosaur paleontology has advanced in the past 20 or 30 years, but how important the work is that you're doing in order for, to kind of lay the groundwork for this understanding of the transition from the Jurassic to the Cretaceous. If we didn't understand
Ontogeny.
that we had that kind of abrupt change in the dinosaur cast of characters,
Mhm.
if there was still that 20 million year gap there that you've since helped to fill, we wouldn't be able to say anything about what's going on at the end of the Jurassic. And, you know, this showed that there's something really interesting there that needs explaining. And
Yeah. Well,
that's often how
knowledge about
science
our
works.
solar system and the history of our solar system
Hmm.
being derived from knowing more about the history of our dinosaurs.
Right.
People,
Yeah.
say, "Oh yeah, this ties back to the space program." It's
Uh
like
huh.
whoop, 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 whoop. I mean, it's people don't realize how science works and the way
Exactly.
it spins off other
How
thoughts. And
interconnected
yeah,
everything is.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
we need people from many disciplines working and talking to each other. That's why we have these big meetings. What do you guys do
Exactly.
with those things?
Yeah.
And it's like it's not like a Shriners convention.
Right. Yeah. No, it's not
Yeah,
just a club to hang
yeah.
out and be clubby. Like, we're trying to get science done,
And
transfer
and we
knowledge,
love it so
evolve
much. I mean,
ideas.
the
Yeah.
excitement of these meetings. I always like saying the Society of Earth Paleo meetings are, better than Christmas. And
Yeah.
the AGI meetings, the American Geophysical Union, which is the biggest
Hmm.
science, geoscience meeting in the world.
Hmm.
They'll have like 8,000 people go to that conference every year
Right.
from all disciplines. I mean,
Hmm.
they're paleontologists to go to AGI.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's gigantic interdisciplinary conference. But these things are so important. People are like, oh, those are wasted. No, they're not. I mean, that's where we network and we find out about other things.
Right. It helps
And
drive the science forward. It's
it
it's
was
an
at the
accelerant for
SVP meeting
research.
when I presented on this topic.
Uh huh.
I got a lot of good responses, and it's opened up a lot of channels
Excellent.
into things that
Yeah.
I mean, it is really worth going to these meetings and sticking your neck out. And I was like, maybe I'll get it chopped off. But I got,
It
I
happens
mean,
sometimes.
because it
Yeah.
really was, because I was like, I'm
Yeah.
presenting the fact that the Morrison fauna, the real Jurassic Park, underwent a mass extinction more than twice as long ago as the terminal Cretaceous extinction,
Right.
that at least in North America killed off almost everything on
Hmm.
land. Yeah, I mean, this may not be as widespread globally, but I think there's things in Asia and whatnot. I mean, it's just not the record most places.
Right. Yeah.
We have this record, so we can say something a little more definitive here.
Hmm.
But this will get people looking a lot closer. I'm hoping.
Right.
And it's like when you find a new dinosaur site, everyone's camped around. Also, you find all these other sites in the neighborhood around the camp.
Hmm.
As people go wandering off.
Which is precisely what happened in St. George. That can bring us to what we want to talk about
Oh
today.
yeah, no, St.
Um,
George is an amazing catalyst for
right.
research and science in the southwestern part of our state.
Hmm.
Unbelievable how much has gone on there. I mean, I asked Andrew because I had a slide. I think you last week
Uh-huh.
played my little lecture for the 20th
Yep.
anniversary, of the
Hmm.
discovery. And now it's been over 25 years. That's over 5 years out of date. And I asked Andrew, how many papers have been published on this place now? Because it was 27 then. It's
Uh-huh.
over 45
Geez, 45
publications on
papers.
that site. Yeah, over
Wow.
45 scientific publications that are derived directly to that discovery.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I think that's as many papers as it done at Dinosaur National Monument. People just
That's
don't get it. That's
right.
considered the second most significant dinosaur track site in North America, number two. And
Uh-huh.
then globally, the Spanish people, working with Luis Ocala and those guys who looked at globally at track sites, their scientific significance. There's a lot of track sites, but which ones are really telling us stuff?
Right.
And it came out number 18 in the world.
That's
St.
impressive.
George
Yeah.
Dinosaur Discovery Site.
Wow.
People in YouTube just don't get it.
Hmm.
That this is probably, in terms of information, in unique information, more important than Dinosaur National Monument and Jurassic National Monument,
Hmm.
because you have that stuff all over Wyoming and Montana, New
Sure.
Mexico,
Pretty widespread.
Colorado.
Yeah.
That's widespread. But this stuff is like, these are unique stories at
Hmm.
some of these sites that we have here in Utah. And it's not the same old thing. Most people that I deal with in the public consider the dinosaur story be like one story,
Right.
you know,
Uh-huh.
as opposed to 140 to 150 million years of stories, you
Hmm.
know, of this incredible interval of history on the planet, that knowing something about is worthwhile. And
Absolutely.
St. George and the collateral research that's come out of St. George, it got the work going at Zion National Park,
Hmm.
on the same interval at Zion. They don't have the broad, horizontally expansive site that they have at St. George. It led to a lot of unique things. But because it's a little steeper in Zion.
It definitely is. Yeah.
Yeah. But you get fresh rock near the surface because it's being so steep. And we're finding the geochem story on that mass extinction at the end of the Triassic, and the St. George site is showing that recovery. That's within 500,000 years of the Triassic extinction event.
St. George's?
Yeah,
I didn't
this is
realize it was
something
that
Andrew didn't
close.
push, because this is something I'm really onto. Is
Yeah, yeah.
St. George is the recovery. It's early Hatangian,
Uh-huh.
the basal stage of the Jurassic.
I didn't realize it was that old. Early
Radiometric
Hatangian.
dates that
Uh-huh.
Selena has published recently,
Uh-huh.
a couple different dates of the basal Whitmore Point stuff, the track site level, are
Uh-huh.
like 201 something. That's the boundary date for the Jurassic.
So
But this
this
is
is
what
something I
happened after the Triassic extinction. This is
right.
showing how dinosaurs took over.
Uh-huh.
Much more. It's not like, the Kayenta is 10 million years later.
Yeah, exactly. I was just gonna say that
Yeah.
when you see all
We
these
say, oh, it's
depictions of
Dilophosaurus. It's not Dilophosaurus doing this. It's the
exactly.
first big meat-eating dinosaurs that we have a record of in the United States, in North America.
Right.
That
Yeah.
came in after this major extinction that
Hmm.
killed off all the phytosaurs and big rauisuchids and things.
Yep.
The carnivorous, mammal-like reptiles, synapsids, the last of those.
Dicynodonts, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
All those things go extinct, and then that's when the dinosaurs really took over. And St. George is the record of this stuff. We got, people just have to hammer some of this home, because people are like too reserved. Scientists, we tend to be reserved.
Right.
It's like, oh, yes, just be careful, be polite.
Exuberance is not our strong suit, at least not in
Well,
public,
well,
usually.
yeah, because it's oh, that's all hype. It's like,
Hmm.
it isn't hype. There's lots we don't know. But, when we realize this is one of the only places we can actually look at this stuff,
Hmm.
in terms of a photo of what was happening in the past, a time machine, for the side of this giant Lake Erie side, Lake Whitmore,
Uh-huh.
that we have down there. It's, I mean, side of a huge lake system. Of course, it was, in a major desert. So
Hmm.
this is like the Nile River Valley kind of environment relative to the Sahara.
Right.
You've got huge deserts at this time in the Southwest.
Uh-huh.
But here you've got a giant lake system at the beginning of the Jurassic. And
Uh-huh.
is this interval of really wet climatic conditions tied to camp volcanism causing a lot of extra moisture in the atmosphere?
Uh-huh.
The Central Atlantic magmatic province, which is tied to the extinction there, at the
Uh-huh.
end of the Triassic. Another is, and the Chinese are finding at this boundary, the Triassic Jurassic, that it was super wet. It's a period of like, Noah's flood rainfall, in China. I mean, we're
Uh-huh.
talking, like we haven't seen rain like this,
And this is different
where
from
you
the
got
Triassic
hundreds
pluvial
of
event, right?
inches.
This is a
What's this?
different event than the Triassic pluvial event, right?
Yeah, no,
So,
that's the Carnian-Norian
right.
boundary. And that's probably what Manicouagan crater in Quebec is probably tied to that.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Huh.
yeah, the Apache, faunas, the Apache and Revoltian faunal
Uh-huh.
turnover,
Right, right.
Carnian-Norian. It's like getting all these things is that turnover the same age? Because one
Mm-hmm.
of the crazy things we're seeing about the Triassic Jurassic boundary, and this is because people are involved. Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But where the golden spike globally, an international team of scientists decided they wanted to put the boundary between the Triassic and Jurassic
Uh-huh.
and the extinction are at least 500,000 years apart. So, I mean, Paul Olson at, Lamont Doherty at Columbia University, we talk about that and he's like, this is stupid. I mean, he's just, because the extinction event happens well before it.
Uh-huh.
The boundary, the golden spike, where they say this is the Triassic Jurassic boundary. The
Right.
extinction's down here, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and we can see both of them there in these sections in the Mojave Formation.
Right.
In fact, we're thinking the lowermost Mojave, this kind of a mudstone interval, might actually correlate to late Triassic rocks
Uh-huh.
further to the east over in the Four Corners region. This
Interesting.
stuff all is being worked on by the Triassic people. I've been telling people for years the TR5 unconformity and the J0 unconformity are
Uh-huh.
really the same unconformity.
Interesting. Okay. It's so interesting to think of the
you know,
lowermost Mojave as being Triassic. Um,
could be there. I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
you know, I mean, it's rocks aren't always working out how rocks relate these
Mm-hmm.
different packages. As things can start depositing in one place, and then deposition shifts over to another place.
Right.
It's like if you look at wax coming off a candle, the wax being the sediment comes down one side of the candle, starts makes a pool, fills up, all of a sudden, bloom, is another area that starts receiving,
Right.
the wax,
I like that
and that's kind of
analogy.
how sediment
Yeah.
works too. So,
Uh-huh.
as we try to tease this story apart,
Mm-hmm.
we realize, very often that we have more of a story than we thought we had because we've got these different wax piles, not all the same.
Right.
It's not a horizontal bed that goes forever. We always say Grand Canyon really ruined us geologically as a science because it's like pancake stratigraphy. Oh, it
Uh-huh.
just goes forever. That's not how it works. You
Uh-huh.
know, and we have to look at, okay, here's sediment, and then here's a break, these unconformities.
Mm-hmm.
So
Missing
as I said,
time,
the
yeah.
TR5, which is a high unconformity in the Chinle formation,
Mm-hmm.
that I think it does correlate to over in St. George, what we call the JO, the base of
Mm-hmm.
Jurassic. Uh, and that could well be the case,
Could be that same gap in the
because
rock
the
record. They
event,
might line up.
yeah,
Yeah.
because people make, the people are drawing these lines.
Uh-huh.
They're not in nature. The events like geochemical global signals and stuff. That's the history imprinting. But
Mm-hmm.
we haven't recognized all these global events. Whatever's happening for me at the end of the Jurassic, that should be a global signal. This
Hmm.
rainfall thing we see,
Yeah. It's probably not
at
a
the
local
base of
thing.
the
Yeah.
Cretaceous, that should be a global signal.
Right.
And maybe like with El Nino, some places it was actually a dry thing that happened somewhere.
Hmm.
We don't know enough about it, but there should be a global perturbation.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can recognize that and what to look for, that might be the best way to get a global, because no one's put a golden spike in the Jurassic Cretaceous boundary yet.
Huh.
Because
Hasn't
there's
been
some
decided on
serious
yet.
argument of where to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's other boundaries. It's like Triassic, Jurassic, even though a lot of us are pretty bugged about where they picked the golden spike.
Uh-huh.
I don't get a vote in that. It's a
Right.
committee, that,
Yeah, a working group.
the International Stratigraphic
Commission.
Commission.
Yep.
This is why the U.S. needs to be a part of the world, because if
Hmm.
we're not going to even have a say what happen, how we look at our planet.
Exactly.
It's like it
Uh,
is. These are international things. National boundaries do not, correlate to geologic or
yeah.
real things. These are political,
Country borders
and
meant nothing back in the
basically,
Jurassic or the Cretaceous or yeah.
I hate to see us not being a member of these international bodies,
Right.
because eventually this is the international consensus is what's going to stand.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It really is.
So,
There's a lot of scientists in the U.S. do believe that's the way we should approach it.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, Getting back to St. George and its importance for figuring out the beginning of the age of
Oh yeah,
dinosaurs.
it's amazing. The catalyst, I
Yeah.
mean, there were 200 sites known in Washington County
Uh-huh. Which is where
before
St.
the
George is, Washington
discovery of
County,
that
Utah.
site.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now we're well over 700 sites in Washington County. Both,
700 sites.
more people looking, and
Uh-huh.
calling Andrew, calling the museum and reporting sites, calling us and reporting
Yeah.
sites. But there were only 200 there, and it was so funny. When I first got this job, and before I even had this job, I'd drive through there,
Mm-hmm.
on occasion. You look at all these red rocks and incredible geology there. Back in the 70s and 80s when I first crossed through there.
Yeah.
And I said, "Wow, this place is going to be an impressive, important place, for geology and paleontology."
Uh-huh.
Absolutely correct. I mean,
Yeah.
no doubt about it. But if it wasn't for that catalyst, that discovery by Sheldon Johnson, the
Right.
right person making the discovery, because a
Mm-hmm.
lot of his neighbors, oh yeah, you can sell these and get rich. And Sheldon's only a view, him and Laverna, is, we've been gifted this incredible thing. How do we use it to benefit our community?
Right.
That's the only thing I ever heard out of their mouths from the first time I met either of them,
Mm-hmm.
is that family's only interest is what can we do to support the citizens of St. George and the citizens of Utah.
That's a beautiful thing.
And
Yeah.
that's, yeah, it was, if it had been someone else, who knows,
Mm-hmm.
what would have happened there.
Well, tell us the story there. Like,
It's, these,
how did all of this start with Sheldon Johnson and yeah, and how did
well,
you first get
Sheldon,
involved with this
the
too?
kind of person yeah, the kind of person Sheldon was is he's an optometrist, so Dr.
Okay.
Sheldon Johnson,
Yeah.
and he, very interested in his community, an active member in the LDS church and
Mm-hmm.
a bishop within the church, served on the school board for 19 years,
Jeez.
promoting
Uh-huh.
education in St. George, figuring out how to build schools cheaper than the developers would build them. Sheldon's like, we'll just be our own contractors. So we can buy, we don't have to spend $10 a plug outlet for a
Right.
school. We can get them at, Home Depot for 50 cents an outlet.
Uh-huh.
Because if you look at architectural supply companies, they design this stuff
Upcharge for
architecturally.
everything, yeah.
We need an A3 plug
Mm-hmm.
outlet here. If you get it through that chain of things, it's like buying a $500,000 toilet seat for the space shuttle. It's like, but it really is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the same system, just in architecture. When they build schools and
Mm-hmm.
museum, contract it yourself, you're gonna build it a lot cheaper.
Hmm.
And Sheldon figured this out a long time ago. So he's building the best, most economic schools in the state for square footage,
We've got a
by
chatterer who
far,
also
like 10
says
times cheaper.
he set up the first program in the area to help children with disabilities in school too. Does that sound right?
Oh, I wouldn't doubt it. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the kind of people they were.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is this is why this has been such a success.
Right.
It's not all the science. The
Mm-hmm.
scientists came down and saved St. George. No, this is the community,
Right.
pulling in scientists and anyone that can help. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Laverna was going to Washington testifying before Congress multiple times. That thing wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for them.
Mm-hmm.
It just would not have. If it was just me and Andrew, sitting there shaking our
Yeah.
wads, everyone would look at us like, okay, good, you guys, whatever, you know.
Uh-huh.
Any of this stuff is up to the citizens.
Mm-hmm.
People and people in the U.S. need to understand it. This is America. People run the country.
Yeah.
That's how it's supposed to be.
That's
And
how it's
when
supposed to be. Yeah.
citizens stand up and say,
Yep.
we want this, it happens. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what happened. You had Sheldon Johnson, 20-year school board. Only interest on this thing is what can we do for our community? And that started getting the ball rolling. When they first built it, there were people showing up saying, "Oh, free tracks," because they were uncovered a
Souvenir
bunch of
hunters.
stuff,
Yeah.
because basically, Sheldon was leveling this area off. He bought these big farm plots along the Virgin River,
Mm-hmm.
so his kids could learn an honest day's labor. It's like, oh yeah, you're
Uh-huh.
gonna run this farm in high school. You're not gonna be
Uh-huh.
out on the streets. You're gonna be, baling hay and
Right.
and learning what an honest day's work is all about.
Mm-hmm.
And but when his kids were grown, basically, Sheldon's going, okay, let's leave something for the children and the grandkids. So
Mm-hmm.
they were developing the area, and he knew it. The place is a city now.
Right.
That there was nothing there when he made the discovery, and they were leveling off the area for a potential future shopping mall or industrial park or whatever it was going to be,
Mm-hmm.
just knowing it'd be worth more money flat.
Sure.
So his son, who was a geology instructor, son-in-law,
Hmm. Uh-huh.
stepson, uh, told him, you should look for tracks, dinosaur tracks, because they've been found out in those rocks.
Uh-huh.
And of course, they didn't tell him to look under the rocks.
He was only looking
Because
on
one
top.
day, Sheldon was out there, big boys with big toys. So he's running his track hoe, peeling up this sandstone layer, and he flips over this big block. And
Uh-huh.
here's this big, beautiful, natural cast of the foot of a dinosaur. And he
Uh-huh.
thought it was a real dinosaur foot sticking out of the ground, underneath,
Just mummified there.
coming out. Because he was like, what's this? I thought they're supposed to be on the top indents,
Uh-huh.
and but he realized there's no question. This, it's a beautiful track. All the claws, everything's perfect. Scales, it's a beautiful, beautiful preserved foot. This initial discovery that he made. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, there's been more tracks as well preserved and others not so well. This is the vagaries of track preservation,
Sure, yeah.
obviously. But Sheldon, got really excited about it, called his son and whatnot. And one of the first places they called was Brigham Young University.
Mm-hmm.
And Wade Miller came down, and Wade called Alden Hamlin, who
Mm-hmm.
used to run the Vernal Fieldhouse, but had retired
Hmm.
to Cedar City. And Alden came down, and the two of them looked at the track. Oh, yeah, there's some nice tracks. I think Wade picked up a couple tracks, put them in the back of his truck, and drove off with them, and was never seen again.
Mm.
Just donated them to the BYU
Yeah.
collection. That was the end of their involvement.
Okay.
And I got a call. Andrew says that I called him to check it out, but I got
Mm-hmm.
the call from Andrew, and
Oh.
that they'd made a discovery. He read it in the paper, I think,
Uh-huh.
and that's what got me down there. But basically, come down. You got to check these out. And when I was sent down there, supposedly a construction site. The news coming out was very filtered. It's a
Sure.
construction site, so they're going to destroy everything.
Uh-huh.
Which is what happens in construction sites.
Yeah.
And basically, okay, go down there, save some track blocks. We put in the rock garden around the Utah Geologic Survey, Department of
Mm-hmm.
Natural Resources building. And I went down there, one of my first trips after getting this job. And, Andrew met me up, down there, and we met Sheldon and Laverna and showing us the stuff. And Sheldon starts talking about how he'd love to see a museum built there and,
Mm-hmm.
preserve this site for the school children of St. George. And, so I go back to Salt Lake. First thing they say, well, what'd you bring us? Did you bring us some nice stuff for the rock garden? And it's like, didn't bring you anything
It's
because
staying there.
Dr. Johnson has got it well in hand. And
Hmm.
what they want to do by far is the best thing that could happen for that incredible discovery down there.
Hmm.
Let's help, just let's work with them and help them. And with their efforts, Sheldon, who's, optometrist, he's not, isn't super rich, but he, well off,
Hmm.
a doctor and been there for many years at that point. Sheldon basically built a fence around the place because people were walking off of tracks or trying to. And, then pretty soon thereafter, he built a big shelter, shade area over on one
Right.
side so they could put blocks under it and people could look at them because St. George is toasty. It's in the
It
desert
gets warm.
in palm tree country. Gets
Yeah.
real warm. So
Yeah.
this is all out of his own pocket. He built a major shade structure, permanent, pillars, and then moved in tracks, and I was going down there looking at things, and we saw some tracks that looked a lot like tracks of, more later Cretaceous plant eaters.
Hmm.
They seem to have blunt toes, wider, chunky foots, but they were all pretty deep
Huh.
tracks. And I called Martin Lockton. I said, we might have the oldest ornithopod tracks anywhere
Uh-huh.
at this site. And so Martin comes down there and starts looking, and we said, well, okay, let's start mapping this site.
Hmm.
So Sheldon starts lifting blocks, and there's a joint system on it, straight, cracks. So you
Hmm.
just lift these blocks. So they're easy to map, lift them, map it, and put the map together. And realize these deep tracks were actually Ubrontes, meat eater tracks,
Yeah.
but where they sunk in real deep,
Uh-huh.
and the toes would flex back. So you wouldn't even see the claws and look shorter and wider. And then
Right.
they'd close the foot up and pull the foot out of the track. And
Hmm.
one of these very deep tracks, we discovered, you could see just the nicks of the claws between the toes as it pulled them out.
Uh-huh.
This is the whole process of one of these animals putting the foot deep into the mud and
Hmm.
then being able to pull the toes together to pull it back out of the hole it made. And this is why elephants and sauropods can get in big trouble, or cows,
Sure.
when they put their feet deep in the mud, because like putting
Hmm.
a fence post, you get a vacuum and they
Yep.
can't pull their feet out and they can die,
Hmm.
mired in the mud. The theropods, these hadrosaurs with their spreading toes, can pull the toes together and pull them out of the
Right.
mud.
Hmm.
And that's what we're seeing here with these tracks, which a site that Andrew recently published on at Glen Canyon. It's giant track block in the Navajo, a little bit younger. There's a whole bunch of those tracks going through, and it was probably a lake within the Navajo Sand Sea.
Hmm.
And hopefully they'll interpret that site at Glen Canyon someday. Incredible site near the shore of the lake. But it's this giant house-sized block that's pointed back to the cliff. So if you're on a boat, you don't even know it's there.
Right.
But they could easily set it up to bring boats in and a trail up to it. No one's walking off with this thing.
Uh-huh.
It's as big as a house, a big house, multi-story house. But a great story there. But that's the same kind of thing. It went deep in the mud. They look like
Hmm.
duck-billed dinosaur type tracks, but it's because of the way that their feet would interact with the deep mud. And this is
Hmm.
one of the things we've been discovering at St. George, because of the nature of these under tracks and the fact they're going into this pretty firm clay with mud cracks in it, that when they punch down, we're really getting to see how the biomechanics of their
Right.
feet operate.
Hmm. Stuff that
I
you
mean,
can't
we're seeing
necessarily tell
things that
just from
we
bones.
don't generally see on walking on firmer substrates,
Right. Yeah.
because we can
Yeah.
really see how were they dealing with this stuff,
Uh-huh.
and as time went on, because of Sheldon's work and, what is it, Senator Bill Hickman was
Hmm.
the head of the finance committee for the Utah Senate back then, and represented the St. George area. Bill Hickman got money, from the Utah State Senate uh, uh, to help preserve that site.
Hmm.
And because of that, they were able to hire Andrew on part time and provide the Utah Geologic Survey funding so that we could justify us going down there, like, every other week we'd go down there to work on the site with them. It's one of the
Hmm.
big projects I had when I first had this job, was working on this, collecting data and figuring out what we're going to do with that site.
Hmm.
It was pretty exciting. And it was during that time interval that Andrew was across the road. Well, actually, a little before that, we're down there. I went down for a visit, and there's all these big track hose across the road.
Hmm.
Uh, and they're just taking off the whole, flattening the whole other side of the road
Uh-huh.
across River
Just
Drive.
destroying all
I'm
that
like,
rock.
what's going on? They're ripping into the track site. They're just,
Uh-huh.
what are they doing over there? Who's doing this? I said, oh, that's one of the developers. They're setting this up as a big development. I think a
Uh-huh.
shopping mall was what the plan was initially. And basically, I got a hold of Darcy Stewart.
Hmm.
Was it what, Sun Homes or something down there?
Who
Big
is the landowner
developer in
or
the
the
valley.
developer or?
And the landowner and developer of that
Okay,
area.
gotcha.
When
Yeah.
they put the road through, because of him and Darcy and Sheldon both owned property there, they
Hmm.
decided Sheldon would get the land to the east of the road, and Darcy would get all the land to the northwest of the road.
Hmm.
As opposed to part on both. Because
Right.
the land boundaries before the road was there, were such that the road just diagonally right through their properties.
Mm.
So they made an agreement to split it at the road. And Darcy, everyone's telling Darcy, you're going to get rich, this stuff. So they started loading track blocks
Uh-huh.
onto flatbed trucks and driving them out to Hill City and
Huh.
storing them out there for
With the
eventual
they're gonna sell
sale,
them?
I guess. But
Mm.
just take them out there, and that was the view. But I got Darcy to let Andrew, collect data from the blocks before they left, photograph
Hmm.
them, and things like that, which was real nice of him. And one day, Andrew says he was, over there working on the main site, stabilizing. It was, a lot of work to do stabilizing that site because it was out exposed.
Hmm.
He's looking across, and all the equipment had stopped, and there were guys out there with brooms, whisk brooming this area off. And I was like, "What's going on?" So Andrew wanders across the road, and their track level actually a
Hmm.
bit higher, maybe, I don't know, 10 feet higher in this rock pile, in the sequence, and they're all sweeping this over. And Darcy shows up, is like, "What are you guys doing? You're supposed to be working." Yeah, they show them, like, well, look at this. There are
Uh-huh.
tracks, and there were these big potholes, in the surface, and there were
Uh-huh.
ripples on the surface. These big potholes. They were, a couple feet across,
Hmm.
and we thought maybe these are sauropod tracks, early sauropods. These big round depressions, and
At the
they
beginning
were
of the
deep.
Jurassic? Wow.
They're
Yeah.
10 inches deep. Yeah. Well, you
Uh-huh.
got sauropod like tracks at this level over in the Wingate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget what
Yeah.
they're called right off the top of my head, but big round post hole like four quadrupedal trackways
Hmm.
that are almost certainly early sauropods at the base of the Jurassic. So we know there's things like that out there, not
Hmm.
just prosauropods, probably early sauropods uh, in the Wingate, but upper Wingate in there, so a little bit younger than this. But basically, oh, sauropods. So we're real excited. Darcy's looking at this, and he just starts shaking his head. And we got to preserve this. It's like, I can't destroy this. There's no way.
Yeah.
So
That's
Darcy
beautiful.
said, "Okay, figure out how we can donate this land to the city,
Hmm.
and make this part of the whole complex of the site." And they went out and brought all the blocks they brought to Hill City back,
Hmm.
and started storing them across the road on Sheldon's property because there's more protection over there because there's so much going on.
Right.
And some of the land over there they built a school on,
Uh-huh.
Fossil Ridge Intermediate School.
Yep.
And there was another big area that was they were going to make into an LDS steakhouse.
Hmm.
And Andrew discovered on this hill just to the River Road side of the school.
Hmm.
And there are multiple things. Got the LDS track site is near the top of the hill. At the time, it had the oldest or Animepus tracks that we knew of anywhere in North America. And Anomepus are ornithopod tracks, just real
Right.
basal
Yeah.
ones.
Hmm.
Uh, and we've got them a little lower now, right near the base, at near the track site level. But the LDS Church traded the city of St. George for
Hmm.
some other property for the steakhouse and turned that hill over to the city
So
for
they're
the
able to
site as
preserve it.
well, to preserve the
Yeah.
sites. So the church headed land, developers. I
Hmm.
mean, this is more than one,
Right.
the invested people in that area
It's a story of the community coming together to
contributing to the.
protect these fossils. It's a
Oh
beautiful
yeah,
thing.
no, this is like
Yeah.
this such a classic American story. I mean, it
Hmm.
really is. I mean, they should do a documentary about this. I wish Sheldon was still alive because it's such a good story, of people, doing the right thing. Other people might look at them saying, well, they were silly. Why would they do that when they could have made money? Um, but
Think how
Sheldon
much more
found
money has
out,
been made for
Darcy
the
too.
community. How much better off the town of St. George is with this incredible
Oh
fossil
yeah.
heritage site, with this museum. Think about all of this
Well,
the
there's
school
been
kids who come over from
6
Vegas for field
conventions.
trips. Yeah,
Oh yeah, all over. I mean, it's the whole region. It's a major school stop.
right.
They school kid in Las Vegas. Well, it was really funny when we were trying to get money to build the place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what was it? Senator Reed from Nevada.
Uh-huh.
Whenever they tried to put stuff up, Orrin Hatch, or trying to remember Senator Bennett, trying to get money to do something with the site,
Mm-hmm.
Reed would be against it, and there was a Democratic majority at the time.
Uh-huh.
So Reed was stopping all this stuff from happening
Uh-huh.
because basically these are Republicans in Utah. Reed was a good member of the church as well, but
Mm-hmm.
he had a thing, and finally, I'm talking to some teachers with they come busloads from down there in Vegas
Right.
with their school kids. This is when it was still just outside with that shelter to the one side.
Before it was a
And I
museum.
said, you guys have got to call your Senator Reed and say, this is an important resource for Nevada as well.
Right.
This is not just a resource that Utah's benefiting from, and you should support it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the things that helped put it over the top. So they
Mm-hmm.
got enough money to put the building up. It was finally getting Reed to stop blocking it, and support it. Which was very good thing, and
Yeah.
Bishop, Representative Bishop, was trying to push stuff through in the House at
Mm-hmm.
the time to do something with this place. So it was really, exciting because this was purely a Republican effort to do this. It wasn't like
Mm-hmm.
a bunch of liberal Democrats doing
Sure.
this. Sheldon and Laverna were staunch Republicans themselves, but this was to benefit their community.
Right.
And as we've seen, it's brought in a lot of money to that community.
Oh
It
yeah.
has been very positive, and it didn't cost them much. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think it was less than $1 million to build that building,
Jeez.
on the site. Oh yeah. I
It
mean,
just goes with that theme that
they
we always
put
talk about,
windows in it,
how
which kicked me out.
paleontology is an
Yeah.
extremely uh, how should I say, inexpensive sort of science. Like, we do
Mm-hmm.
so much with so little, and there's so much return on investment for every dollar spent on paleontology. It's probably $10 that come back to the economy in the long run, and
Oh
it's
yeah. No, it's pretty amazing. I mean, that's the thing we built there in Fruta. You've been to the
yeah,
Fruta, dinosaur journey. Yeah. Yeah, we
yep,
built that for $700,000.
really,
Yeah, yeah.
wow, yeah,
And then
uh
you look
huh,
at the development there.
uh
And
huh,
as soon as we broke ground and McDonald's broke ground across the street,
yep, all
now
those
there's like
hotels
half a
and
dozen,
restaurants, yeah,
hotels and
uh
shopping
huh,
malls. All that was because of that dinosaur journey facility going in.
right, mm-hmm,
You know, I mean, it's like it was an incredible catalyst for development in the area.
mm-hmm,
I mean, La Brea, is such a
yep,
tourist magnet for Los Angeles.
absolutely,
People come from
yeah.
all over the world to go to La Brea.
Uh-huh.
people that aren't interested in Hollywood or, I
Sure.
mean, it's a tourist attraction,
It really is.
and it
Yeah.
gets visitation not quite as high as Disneyland, but a lot of people who go to Disneyland also go to La Brea with their kids.
This is true.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. The tar pits, oh yeah,
yeah, I was just there last
yeah, it's,
September and got to go to the museum for the first time. It's always been closed when I've come through. I've been very unlucky.
hmm,
Got to visit it for the very first time this past September, and it was magical. Beautiful museum, really good
oh,
presentation of the science there. And I think my favorite part was seeing visitors walk through, people that they don't necessarily look like they'd be that interested in fossils, and just see their jaws open agape, seeing the skeleton of a ground sloth
yeah,
or a Columbian mammoth or something.
mm,
It's beautiful, you know. Um,
oh
and I'm
yeah.
looking forward to seeing
Now
something
these
similar
records,
when I go to St.
this
George. Yeah,
stuff is in your backyard
yeah,
if you live in the right part of the world.
right, yeah, yeah,
I mean, they got part of a dinosaur in Washington D.C.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. Capitalosaurus. Yeah,
Tobone Capitalosaurus,
yep,
which is
yeah.
probably not valid, but
It's not.
you know,
Yeah,
it's
pretty
probably
not very
a
diagnostic
Tobone of
material.
Acrocanthosaurus.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's probably acro.
you think so?
It really is.
It would be
Yeah, it was a good shot. It's a theropod,
so like Cloverleaf
flange.
Formation equivalent, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Urundle, that stuff fauna is
Arundel.
almost exactly the same age. All that stuff.
Uh
There,
huh.
the Paluxy in Texas, antlers in
Right.
Oklahoma, Clover. That's all this like early Albion,
Uh huh.
stuff at about 110 million, 112 million. It's really weird. That's like the beginning until this discoveries in Utah. That was the beginning of the record. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, we've tacked on another 30 million years below it in Utah
Mm-hmm.
of, history, half the length of the age of mammals. That was
Right.
unknown in North America, at
Mm-hmm.
least for terrestrial animals,
Right.
but it's, that stuff is like, for the tectonic, the geologic history of North America, that was like setting the stage for deposition,
Mm-hmm.
before you start getting seaways and things back. The great interior seaway is, above that stuff.
Right.
But those are the first time sediment is starting to accumulate sediment again
Mm-hmm.
after a long period across much of the world of erosion. Uh, that we need to understand that better. But even in China, we don't have much of that record.
Right.
Certainly not with fossils. You look at the age of Liaoning stuff in China, whatnot. That all dates at just before Cloverleaf.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the second half of the early Cretaceous.
Right.
Older stuff in the Cretaceous China, no, they don't have it. It's
Again, one of the reasons why
yeah.
Utah is
Now
so
everyone go,
important.
oh, they have it
Yeah.
in China. No, they don't. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
I mean, the assumption, as I said, everybody looks at dinosaurs. They all lived at the same time. Disney or whatever. Yeah, it's just they all
Yeah.
lived at the same time. Like,
Just one big fruit salad all
no,
mixed together, all the dinosaurs at once. Like,
yeah,
absolutely not.
all
No.
fossils are contemporaneous of each other. It's just
Yeah, in the
you
prehistoric
know,
time. Yeah.
yeah.
Anyway,
Back then
speaking
with
of
the cavemen.
yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. Now, speaking of faunas like this, Jim, tell us a little bit about what kinds of critters have been found in St. George so far, and which haven't been named yet, which we might hope to be able to find pieces of that might be diagnostic enough to publish on over the next month or
Well,
so as we're digging.
have you been, they found, but it looks like another dinosaur bone with that
Yeah,
piece of heavy
Andrew was telling me
equipment that
about it on the
pulled up
phone
right.
yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's a bone. It may not be a limb bone. It may be a finger bone of the big theropod,
Oh,
or it's a gray ladder size animal, but it could be, big finger bone. Unfortunately,
interesting.
they hit it with the blade of this big piece of equipment.
Right.
So
Not the
yeah,
best way
like,
to find a
Andrew, where's the
dinosaur.
rest of it? He said, we
Yeah.
looked. He says, nope, this thing popped up, so we saved that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you've got it. And what's the funny part of that story is the guy running this equipment, which is bigger than what they need at the moment. You know, they need more. They're supposedly going to show up with a backhoe today, which would have been a little
Right.
more finesse than this
Mm-hmm.
giant thing. But they're telling the guy, try to stay above about a foot or a couple of feet above that green layer, and it says green layer and these red rocks.
Uh-huh.
And you heard, yeah, he's colorblind, the operator. What do you mean? What green layer? It's a green layer in the red rocks. What red rocks? It's all the same color,
Red green colorblind is,
same
yeah.
tone, different colors.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Well,
Oops,
yeah.
that's a problem. So Andrew was trying to direct this guy, and it's like it all looks the same to me.
Right. Hopefully that's the last of those mishaps. But yeah, I mean
Yeah,
that's
yeah, that was interesting.
it's exciting that even at these very early stages of working this part of the site, we're already getting
I
dinosaur
know they're
bones
just trying
kicking
to
up.
move the overburden right now.
Yeah. That's really
Just move
promising. That
oh, believe me, I've been out there for a lot of years.
yeah, yeah.
It's like really rich. I mean, the blocks like the disarticulated coelacanth skulls, you don't
Hmm.
miss this stuff. I mean,
Right.
even if you're working faster than you would like,
Uh-huh.
because you've got this area that's say a meter across, full of these big bones. And
Hmm.
once you realize what they are, you realize these are different skull bones of the coelacanth in
Wow.
this area. And then, they got like two of these things. I think they
Uh-huh.
probably have everything of the skull of the
Yeah.
big coelacanth.
Really?
And,
Shoot.
as you said, they got a partial tail. And,
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's a big thing. We're talking bigger than Latimiria,
Yeah, so
a
that's
big
Jim,
masonid. What?
we're all
Yeah,
about
no, I saw
coelacanths
your,
here on
Latimiria
on
thing.
this channel. We love
Yeah.
coelacanths here.
So
Um,
bigger than that.
bigger than that. Yeah,
A big
that's
skull. Yeah,
so
skulls are probably big as basketballs.
jeez. Wow. And this critter's not been
Yeah,
named
it's a
yet,
big.
as I understand it.
No, and they've also got you know lake beds in the basal Cayenta.
Mm-hmm.
Where return to lake conditions a bit
Yeah.
later in town after there's an deformity, but then you
Mm-hmm.
get some more lake beds, same setup, and they've got another huge coelacanth in those beds.
Huh.
So they've got
Nice.
two at different levels,
Uh-huh.
two big unnamed coelacanths that are about 10 million years or so apart.
Very,
They
very
may end
cool.
up being the same genus. It's like we're trying to get 3D data on the Chinle
Mm-hmm.
coelacanth,
Right.
which it's got skulls that would get almost a foot long in the biggest ones,
Uh-huh.
Chinlea,
Yeah.
and back east they have Dipterus, they had a different genus of good
Huh.
sized coelacanth in the Newark group.
Uh-huh.
These freshwater coelacanths.
Right.
And we're trying to figure out, the biggest thing, in naming this is to diagnose it relative to Chinlea,
Mm-hmm.
because there was a pretty good sized skull that was in private hands that
Right.
I got Andrew a cast of it.
Mm-hmm.
We're at Labaro. They gave us the old mold. They made a mold of this thing. We're
Uh-huh.
returning it to the guy that found it.
Right.
But a perfect 3D skull of a Chinlea, like that big.
Uh-huh.
And we made a cast of it from these old latex molds.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty good. I mean, we worked hard to do it right, and then we bootleg that,
Right.
recast our cast. So we
Uh-huh.
have good molds of the thing now. But that thing is bouncing around somewhere in Europe,
I've seen your
because the
wanted
guy
poster that you
found
made
it.
of it.
Yeah, I've sent this wanted poster out,
Yeah.
and the owner must know that we're looking for it. We're not
Uh-huh.
trying to steal it back from the guy, even though it's probably from public lands originally.
Yeah.
But we want to get it CT scanned,
Right.
and that's the goal, so we can get good 3D imaging of a nice 3D Chinlea skull from the Chinle from the Triassic.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can diagnose these skull bones relative to Chinlea, so we can describe it properly. That's
Mm-hmm.
been the biggest one. That thing would have been named a decade ago if we
Right.
could have got that when I first put out those wanted posters.
Uh-huh.
But alas, whoever got it, the thing had an incredible journey.
Mm-hmm.
Went to Oklahoma, which is where this rock hound was from.
Uh-huh.
Then when he died, his family sold it to Geological Enterprises in Ardmore, Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
Then they sold it to a fossil fish collector in Britain.
Uh-huh.
Then he traded it to a German or Austrian. I can't remember. He was in his 80s when I actually talked to the guy.
Uh-huh.
And he was in his 80s, and he really couldn't remember who he had traded it to. But he traded it to some fish collector in either Germany or Austria, probably Germany. And that's as far as we've tracked it. So we think it still exists in a private collection
Yeah.
somewhere in Central Europe.
Well, if anybody in the audience right now has
Yeah.
any leads on this, email
Yeah, because
Jim.
I got
Not kidding.
German colleagues that have volunteered that they would CT scan it for us in Germany.
Uh-huh.
It's not like we got
Yeah.
to have them sent to the US.
Right.
We have German colleagues that would do it in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So the guy could almost like hold it the entire time,
Right.
and you can steal it from me.
It could be
So the
handcuffed to his
person
wrist.
can
Yeah.
be very sure that he'd be able to retain in possession. And the
Right.
fact it's the real one, it wouldn't do anything but make it more valuable.
Yeah, that's true.
If the guy was
Yeah.
interested in the value of the thing, it's
Mm-hmm.
because it is the best specimen of Chinlea that's ever been found.
Mm-hmm.
And they're starting to get some 3D bones of some stuff at Petrified Forest National Park. But they're much smaller individuals,
Uh-huh.
they're fine. So it's, they're not, they'll have good data, but
Right.
it's getting something that's big like this. This things change morphologically as they grow, even fish
Sure.
to some
Yeah.
degree. So we'd really like to be able to compare it
Mm-hmm.
directly with this thing. And we got casts of it, but that's just the external morphology of the bone.
Right.
I think it's pretty clear because we have ornament on this bone that I think is different than we see in Chinlea. And Andrew's got complete Chinleas. There's some fish quarries in Utah where Chinlea was first named.
Okay.
Where we can collect a slab that's a couple of feet across and have multiple Chinlea complete articulated skeletons on it.
Mm-hmm.
We've got some Triassic fish beds on state land in Utah. So I issue the permits that are seriously world class. Like 10 different taxa, like
nice.
What is it?
Very nice.
The Hemicolopterus, the herbivorous fish, and all these other things, Seminotus, Taniacroceus, red-fieldeds. I mean, it's amazing. It's an amazing site.
So we've got
And
a
I
lot of
stumbled
material that
onto
we
that
can.
literature trying to track down information on fish because we knew we were finding all these fish. It's like, okay, now what do we do to do taxonomy on these?
Mm-hmm.
And I realized Bob Schaefer at the American Museum had gone into this area after they had bulldozed some uranium roads and popped up all these fish. So they just picked them up along the road. And we went back into the site and literally found where the stuff's coming out. Some major fish bed. I'd like to get that site preserved just as not as an exhibit facility, but I'd like to see us go in there with a track hoe and open that up and collect, for some of our local museums, at least some major museum exhibit specimens. Because if you got a slab 4 or 5 foot across of that, you can have 15 different fish on it of eight different species.
Jeez.
Yeah, I mean, this is like unbelievably cool. And each type of fish, they have these armored scales, most of them.
Yeah, those ganoid scales.
Yeah, but the different ones are red-fieldeds tend to be red. Hemicolopterus tends to be green.
Interesting.
The Semionoteds are blue.
Different chemical compositions? Is that the idea?
That's, I guess, slight differences in the chemistry of the ganoid scale.
Yeah.
It makes the surf scale. I don't know. No one studied it.
Interesting.
So we don't know, but that's something that's pretty obvious when you're looking at this stuff going, the different fish of different colors, scales.
Right. It could be a master's project right there.
Oh, man. And for museum, like jaw-dropping exhibit specimens, getting a big pen. I mean, it'd take a long time to prepare. And I've actually, and people, go, oh, you can't do this. But I've suggested that we open it up to commercial collecting with the caveat that they help us get a couple big museum specimens out of the site, and that everything they sell, they have to prepare it first, before they sell it. But they can sell these for $1,000 a piece.
Sure.
I mean, because the rarity and beauty of these things. Every one of them's got to be photographically modeled in full color with scale. So we have a 3-dimensional representation of each
big
fish.
database.
And then
I like that idea.
rare stuff, stuff, goes to the museum. But
Yeah.
there's eight or so fish that are common,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So, there's a real diversity of different fish. The coelacanths are
Mm-hmm.
abundant, so, you know,
Yeah.
you don't see that stuff much.
No, you don't. You really don't.
And it's like, can we, because it's state land and the feds would never let us do this.
Mm-hmm.
Could we develop something, between a commercial outfit and the state of Utah that benefits everybody?
Uh-huh.
Because I don't see any reason it can't be done.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we could find a pterosaur in the site, or a little crocodilian, we could,
Yeah.
but say we got to take this from you guys, sorry. But you can have a replica too, and you can
Right.
sell replicas of it. And the
Yeah.
real one should go in the museum. But there's so many common fish, and they could collect big slabs, multiple fish that could go for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah.
Yeah. I if it's a choice between letting the things just languish or erode and be destroyed, or
Mm-hmm.
having them be sold, but we've got the data from each of them and the most
Mm-hmm.
important specimens we keep for
Are
science.
going to the museums. Yeah.
I take that deal, Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's the way
Yeah.
I feel too.
Uh-huh.
It's like, it's like, there's ways that this stuff can be done,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, but it's, one, this, you either do it all this way or none. And if you do it all this way, where no one can sell something, it's not going to get dug. I
Right.
mean, no one's going to, Andrew's got more than they can prep in 100 years of
Mm-hmm.
this material from here now. And of course, because it's, the way the state works, they're not a state repository. I would
Mm-hmm.
make them one, but I don't have the, that's not my job description. The
Mm-hmm.
university museum is the only one that can make them a state repository.
Gotcha.
I think they should be able to keep some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Anything they prepare and work on has to go to the University of Utah.
Mm.
you know I mean, it's like there's so much that they do ends up at the university, and they don't get to keep the benefits of it, even
Uh-huh.
as a public institution.
Right.
So it's some of this stuff just kind of drives me nuts, because I look at these guys and like, they need to be able to keep some of this stuff
Right.
just to justify it to their board. Why
Mm-hmm.
are we working on this stuff if we don't get to keep some of it?
Right. Well,
Yeah, I
that's
can
one thing I was
understand.
wondering, Jim, is whether it might be possible for the museum in St. George to get federal repository status at some point, especially if they've got a higher profile for more projects going on and more scientific papers. What are the
Well,
odds of
this is
that?
what their space right now is, they're packed to the gunnels, and
Yeah.
they have good collections, from
Mm-hmm.
private land, city land there as it is. Beautiful stuff. I mean, incredible things. I mean, they have
Mm-hmm.
fossil Triassic plants with cones, and you can rattle the seeds in the cones.
That's nuts. Wow.
I mean, nuts. I mean,
200 million
just,
years old and you could do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, nuts, some of the stuff they've got. But they just don't have much space. In fact, one of the things I would like to ask your people, and any construction companies in southern Utah are
Yeah.
listening, they could use a cargo container,
Mm.
long-term loan. They can get it
Uh-huh.
back eventually, but they're where are they putting this stuff?
Right.
Andrew says they're already filling all the space in the lab,
Uh-huh.
which is already crowded,
Mm-hmm.
with this stuff. And it's like, yeah, if you do this for 2 months, you're going to fill a cargo container of material,
Right.
and we need a place to put it. They've
Uh-huh.
got a donation or of a little storage shed, the ones you build.
Uh-huh.
They're putting in the fenced off area the school set aside for the bung
Good.
bed,
Right.
and that'll be in a locked up area. But
Mm-hmm.
for just the plaster jackets and things, they need like a cargo container.
Mm-hmm.
I brought this up with Andrew today. It's like, you guys need to think bigger than, a Rubbermaid storage shed.
Right.
You need something big that can stand up to the climate,
Mm-hmm.
out there. And, eventually you're going to have to move the stuff out. And of course, my bucket list item, one of the things I've been pushing, before I die, before I retire, is to get them buildings on the other side of the street.
Mm-hmm.
one over the LDS track site thing, which would be 3 stories high. Remember, it's a
Mm-hmm.
hill with 3 different levels of tracks in there,
Uh-huh.
and prep them out in place. You can even charge people, up and uncover them. So
Right.
just put a shell up right now over it, and then just charge people to help you dig it for a few years,
Sure.
slowly, and then you can put floors in and walkways, piece at a time. But they also need a building either adjoining that or next to it, uh, where they can have a real repository
Mm-hmm.
and something where they could actually drive a forklift into to move track blocks
Mm-hmm.
that they have. They already have the biggest track collection outside of anywhere in the world, and it's degrading outside in the weather, and they need to get it under cover, and then would become a federal repository. They need a proper facility. I'm saying the same
Gotcha.
thing with the prehistoric museum in Price.
Uh-huh.
We've got to get them a real legitimate repository facility because they deserve it.
So good
What
collection
they
space,
have,
that's the primary kicker, is like they need a climate
they need the
controlled.
space. They've got the people. They've already got the system in place. They're
Uh-huh.
curating the stuff state of the art.
Yeah.
They're doing as good a job as any museum in the country.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many people from other museums that look at what they've got and they're like, "You're not a repository,
Jeez.
officially," and
Yeah.
they can't believe it.
Well, we should explain to the chat what a repository is first, too, just so
Mhm,
that we're not talking over people's heads too much. Do you want
yeah,
to explain that a little bit, Jim?
sure. Well, the way the laws are set up, and this is not just the feds; it's the state of Utah is the same way. That materials and a proper museum, has collections, you know, and collections are curated like library books. They get catalog numbers. There's files with data concerning that object, the history of the object, what glues were used on it, whatever. Same with archaeologic things. If you're an art museum, your art would also be curated in the same sort of way. There are records for each of your objects. Well, this is how any museum operates. But with current federal laws, specimens that come from federal land need to go to a legitimate, what they call federally compliant repository. And those standards were set up pretty long ago by the National Park Service and the Smithsonian. And museums across the country all agreed, all were part of that establishment of what are the standards that a proper collection is kept under. So to go out and dig up fossils on federal land and bring them into your facility, you have to be a recognized federal repository. And that means you're keeping your records properly, you have the right kind of storage condition, and data. So, someone wants to come in and study a specimen, you know where to find it. And the
Right.
specimen is in good shape when you do find it.
Mm-hmm.
So it basically operates like a library, in this case for paleontological resources. And the state of Utah has exactly the same standards established over 30 years ago.
Hmm.
In fact, Utah was had the first statutes in the nation before the feds even
Really?
that specifically preserve fossils,
Huh.
and needed to be done with scientific oversight. In 1957, the state of Utah passed legislation regarding how fossils in Utah should be treated,
Impressive.
in
Yeah.
terms of their care, and that it should be done under permit.
Uh-huh.
Before the feds ever really set up any kind of permitting system that was legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
When I first was working in Utah, we'd get a letter from the Utah BLM saying, "Okay, have fun, don't get hurt." That was basically what a permit letter from the Bureau of Land
Right.
Management in Utah used to say back in the 80s.
Uh-huh.
It's like, don't get hurt, so you can't sue us.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, yes, cover our own skin, and this,
Uh-huh.
but now, and this is proper. And in Utah, be recognized as a state repository,
Mm-hmm.
so for like these fish, for these guys to keep those, legitimately, they have to be okayed by the Utah Museum of Natural History,
In Salt Lake. Yeah.
which I don't like. because to
Mm-hmm.
me that's a conflict of interest because they
Sure.
are a repository. So
Uh-huh.
a repository shouldn't be policing the other repositories.
Makes
You know,
sense.
that's I look at that as something the state paleontologist should do regarding paleo collections,
Right.
and the state division of state history should be doing the same with archaeology.
Uh-huh.
Not necessarily. I mean, they should be consulted. You know, if a museum goes belly up, what
Right.
to do with the collections? It should be an automatic setup.
Mm-hmm.
But I like
Where
the
it goes to
rules
somebody else, yeah.
regarding repositories in Utah.
Uh-huh.
There's supposed to be a repository committee the state paleontologist is supposed to be on, you know, so I'm supposed to be on this committee.
Yeah.
Since this law was passed, and, you know, before I started working here, probably 30 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
uh, there's never been a single meeting of the state repository committee. I don't know if I should say that in public, but I find it outrageous. I just never has met. I didn't know the thing existed until a couple of years ago. It was supposed to exist, but I was looking at because the repository laws are tied to the museum, Natural History
Uh-huh.
Museum of Utah.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm more focused on the laws regard me.
Mm-hmm.
The state paleontologist and permitting and things of that sort, keeping the state database together of important resources in our state.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm looking at this stuff because I'm wanting to get them to be a repository. And what there's supposedly be a state repository committee that supposed to meet twice a year, which is I think a
Uh-huh.
bit much, but it has never met. And it lists specifically that the state paleontologist is on the committee as well as other people
Yeah.
representing state parks and the various stakeholders in the state. And it is never, I mean, I always love this about legislation because
Uh-huh.
older legislation is just forgotten about. So you see, that's why you see all these overlapping laws of things because legislators, oh, they did that, 2 3 generations ago. We didn't even know
Right.
this was,
Mm-hmm.
didn't know it existed. So you end up with these
Forget.
tiers. So once the
Yeah.
lawyers dig into this stuff for some cause,
Right.
the complexities become ridiculous.
Uh-huh.
It's like, you got to pay attention to laws you already got. Yeah.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it's not just the feds, it's not just the state, it goes down to cities. They pass statutes. It's like, the people that run the city of St. George, there's no one
Mm-hmm.
running that city that remembers these early agreements with these landowners and things regarding the track site and the plans that
Uh-huh.
everybody thought were in place then. They're just like, we don't
Right.
know anything about this. We can do whatever we want with that place. We don't
Uh-huh.
have to pay attention to what people thought they were agreeing to. You know,
Well, can we
this
talk a little bit
this.
about that, about what's going on at the track site right now and why this is such an urgent thing right
Mm-hmm.
now? Can you kind of walk us through the situation as it stands?
Yes. Well, basically, we've been trying to get them to be a repository. It all goes back to the repository
Yeah.
bucket list item of my career. Is get St. George to be a southwestern Utah repository.
Yeah.
We don't have anything in the region, and I personally think we need one.
I agree.
Maybe it'll be in Cedar City. I mean, there's talk now that Cedar City would be the place and not St. George, but we need one in that region, in
Mm-hmm.
my mind. Not just Salt Lake City. Everything's in Salt Lake City.
Right.
So we need to take care of our rural communities too, so they have benefit
Yeah.
from this incredible resource we have in this state.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but anyway, we're looking at that. And one of the things we started looking into, people inquired, well, Jim, in the books, is this thing about making a Utah paleontological landmark, and and it's part of the job under the Utah Geologic Survey and state paleontologists to designate paleo landmarks
Mm-hmm.
with the landowners' permission, whether it's state land, people, BLM, whatever, just within the boundaries of Utah. And I was asked, well, you look into making St. George a paleo landmark. We did
Mm-hmm.
that, tried to do that, and actually got approved by our board. And the city of St. George said, what? Because it is real restrictive. I don't know if I want
Mm.
to agree to the way this thing was set up
Uh-huh.
myself. But it's okay. let's be the squeaky wheel. Let's try to make it a paleo landmark, see what
Uh-huh.
happens. And, basically that didn't go over real big. We're still looking into that. It hasn't been happening this year. But this is to be a repository. But one of the things that came up over this was, they were looking to put in a electric substation over there on that side of the road in the area that the older plans it suggested would be reserved for excavating the dinosaur core, site.
Sure.
And because nothing had been developed there, it just was sitting languishing for 20 something years. So it's a long time. And no one in the city remembers this stuff because most of the people involved aren't even alive now,
Sure.
you
Yeah.
know? And so people come on board and I know what I'd like to see happen there. Pickleball courts, skateboard park, it's just, and it's like, well, it's supposed to be this and uniquely qualified for this. So the power station came across our radar about a year ago that they were wanting to do this here. And we said, whoa, this is not a good deal. We wanted, and for a while there, some of our contacts that are, tied into our state legislature and whatnot, we're working on trying to get some land purchased by the city of St. George and put the power station somewhere else.
Right.
And, and this has been something that's been on a radar for over a year. And we got the word they were going to do this, and we were like, okay, we can relax. Well, in January, that wasn't long ago, January, we found out they're going to break ground on this electric substation in April. And now it's moved back to like June, maybe, but they want to do it like ASAP, and it's going to go down like 15, 20 feet into the ground, cover about an acre.
So they're just going to destroy everything.
We're talking, it's not just like a little box. This is a big electric substation.
Yeah.
And they're going to put it right on the site over there. And it's like, it's right on the only early Jurassic bone bed, that's produced a large theropod dinosaur anywhere in North America. So it's unique and produced a lot, but we have published on it,
Right. Yeah.
And we're hoping to get more. And it's always been like, we'd like to open that. Part of the site is actually owned by the school, and they have fenced off the school property part so that no one would mess with it until they're ready to start work on the site. So the school is already set aside part of this thing.
Right.
Remember, this is the only one we know of. And we've looked around saying, Washington County, we haven't found any other places that have bone like this.
So it is unique. It's very, very special. This one particular
right
spot.
now, there's nothing else. Never say never, but right now it's the only site like it. And we got all of a sudden going from it's okay to we got to get this thing dealt with in 2 months with no money. Because the highway department, they were doing highway work, and they took down the signage directing people to the track site. This happened about a year ago. And then they never put the signage back up.
Andrew was telling me about this on the phone yesterday. He says their visitorship has been way down. People driving through just don't know about it.
50% drop in visitorship. 50%. They had to lay people off at the museum and they were self-sufficient. The money, from people paying to go in was paying for these people to keep this stuff going and develop this dynamic educational facility that they have. It's tragic. And they contact the highway department office locally, and they decided, well, we don't think this is something we should be, supporting with signage. Free, there's normal highway signs. And people have sent me, since we started looking at this, pictures of highway signs the state of Utah has put up for like rock shops. Lagoon, which is a private, facility, recreation facility. I mean, it's like, guys, this is owned by the public, and you don't want to let word out. It was an incredibly successful thing. What is the deal? And, of course, we've talked about the survey. This is crazy. This is the stupidest thing ever, but nothing has changed. The highway department still hasn't replaced those signs, even though I thought we'd made it clear. But it's not like I don't call newspapers.
Right.
Doing this is marginal.
Yeah.
Talking in this interview,
Yeah.
but because we're not. I work for the citizens of Utah, and there's a chain of command, and we try to work with our chain of command,
Right.
to get things done. But everybody's busy. It's this is one of the things people need to keep in mind. The way these things work. But the signage on the highways, huh?
Yeah.
That was nuts. It's paying for itself.
Right.
It's not like the place costs the city money and it brings in money. To build a repository facility, you got to build the building. That's got to come from the state, or the city. I'm going to do it, but the state at least, to build the facility, to do it. But the money coming in to the facility should keep its operation going.
Sure.
And if you do it properly, by keeping up a certain public, face, letting the public know you're doing things, have exciting things happening, just be a dynamic part of your community and the region, it'll succeed, and, it's like, I'm a big understander of the fact that, to operate as a nonprofit, you got to bring in more money than you spend.
Yep.
Because you'll go belly up, as well as a for-profit would, if you don't bring in more money. But it's the infrastructures. Our national parks are the same way. Some of the parks that are laying people off, like Zion and Arches right now, they bring in way more money than they cost.
Yeah.
And it's their money from people paying to go to Zion or Grand Canyon or any of these parks that pays for the historic parks.
Yep.
John
And pays
Doe's
for many of the
birthplace
businesses in
in
those towns
Chattanooga.
too.
Those are all paid for out of the big national parks.
Not even to
So
mention the gas
need by-
stations, the restaurants, all these private businesses nearby that'll go belly up too if people aren't visiting these parks anymore because they're not accessible.
Oh yeah.
It's
maddening. It's crazy. It really is.
Yeah. And they were
it's
understaffed
like,
to start with. It's not like they had a glut of workers there. It was they were
they take
severely
most of their
understaffed.
budget. I think Arches gets 30% of their money that comes in from attendance. The rest of it goes to the state park service coffers to fund the small parks that, all the historic sites and battlefields and things that just don't bring in the same kind of money.
Yeah.
And you've got a lot of those. I mean, if they went through and audited all the parks for visitation, they would realize, all the parks are not equal in terms of, the amount of people. Not like we shouldn't be protecting, Paul Revere's house and things like this. But, certainly, Abe Lincoln's cabin, but they don't bring in the same kind of money, something like Zion or Arches, as they say, the big five of Utah bring in.
Yep.
And, but most of that money leaves, to support these other places, because the Park Service has a general coffer that everything is funded out of.
Right.
And, and that's the same with the state parks, and the city park. The museum there at St. George is a city facility run by a foundation, and the foundation board, and you always want a good foundation is critical, because the people in the foundation should also be trying to raise money. Very often they just want to be able to declare membership in the foundation.
Right.
But they should, you want to get people in your foundation that can bring in grant money, have friends in industry. I got a buddy at Ford. They can get you a field vehicle. That's how a good foundation operates. But once they don't operate well, then they perpetuate not operating well. Which is the sad part about museums. Once you get a bad foundation, not saying St. George is a bad foundation, but things, I think surprised a lot of them how fast things changed.
Right.
In terms of the money, the resources coming in. Those highway signs, incredible.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know, how quickly that dropped off. And now, you know, the substation going in, you
mm-hmm.
know, their lab had zero money in the budget this year. Zero.
Jeez.
You know, like, you know, we got Utah Friends of Paleo to buy plaster for this stuff. And,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Utah Friends of Paleo just got them that Scutellosaurus skeleton.
Right. Yeah.
And, you know, that was paid for them and money that you helped raise,
Mm-hmm.
you know, donations and other, you know, friends of paleontology that I know around the country that are
Mm-hmm.
able to talk into donating toward that fund. So they're getting a new skeleton of a little bitty dinosaur,
Yeah.
but one that would occur at St. George. You
Mm-hmm.
know, as I tell them, don't get skeletons of stuff that don't exist down
Right.
there. You know, interpret what you can see from your window. You
Mm.
know, because you've got this incredible unique record. You know, it's not like you need a big exhibit of Green River fish. There's
Right.
enough of them out there. You don't need to exhibit Jurassic dinosaurs. You
Right.
have no Jurassic dinosaurs. I mean, big dinosaurs like Allosaurus. You
Morrison
have
stuff.
none of
Yeah.
that stuff in St. George.
Yeah.
You know, focus on your uniqueness.
Right.
You know, and
Well.
so the substation, all of a sudden, we've got this crisis.
Right.
You know, no money to deal with it. You know, limited volunteers, and of course, most of the volunteers down there are retired people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you know, people that are in their 70s that sit in the lab and prepare fossil fish and other things, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and do brilliant stuff for them, or docents leading tours around the exhibits. You know, their volunteers are wonderful group of people, but they're mostly older retired people. So,
Right.
okay, you're all going to get shovels and picks, and we're going to have you move an acre of rock 10
Hard
feet
labor
down.
you're
Rock.
sentenced to. Yeah.
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 All of a sudden, it's like we got a crisis. We need young people,
Mm-hmm.
you know, with strong backs helping do this. And we got college groups coming down.
Right.
You know, Josh
Yeah.
Lively's got a team from the University of Texas that
Mm-hmm.
they're able to corral, and they're setting up their camp today. But they'll
Excellent.
be out helping dig over the next week out there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they got to drive from Warner Valley 15 miles both ways from their
Uh-huh.
camp. You know, they can't camp on site. The
Right.
city wouldn't give anyone permission to camp on
Mm-hmm.
site. I was hoping to camp on site. You know, so it's, you know, I got special permission to get a hotel room. I'm 70. I got a CPAP machine. I got to plug in, you know, to stay alive. You know?
Right. Don't want to be sleeping on the
You know,
ground or
I
anything.
mean,
Yeah.
my solar power out there, and you know, I got to heat the air too, so it's like it'll work
Mm-hmm.
in the summer, but I can't. I don't have solar power enough to keep my CPAP machine
You
going all
deserve a
night.
hotel room, Jim. You absolutely do, and I'm glad you've got one.
Oh man,
I'm
yeah,
fine
but I
sleeping
had
in
to
a
get
tent as long
permission.
as they give me a
Our
place. So.
budgets this year are tight
Yeah.
because this was a big
Yeah.
shortfall, you know, for a lot of things in Utah this
Yeah.
year that were unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, predicting the future it'd be pretty good if we could do it.
Yeah.
You know, because if we knew this would happen a year ago, we'd be in much better shape.
Yeah, for
We
sure.
thought it
Yeah.
was taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that okay, we can, you know, because what we've been trying to do is get money for those buildings.
Mm-hmm.
You know, get them established as a repository, get something going, start doing, you know, like cleaning up the area,
Yeah.
putting stuff in buildings, you know, so it's clean and pretty. You know, people look at it, it looks like a dump out there
Mm-hmm.
because we haven't had the money to bring it up to the same kind of attractiveness that the stuff on the other side of the road is.
Mm-hmm.
But the goal has always been that would have buildings. And the city, there's people have talked about a walkover bridge, you know, between both sides of the road, because they got the school there too, and a shopping center where the kids like to spend money, you
Right.
know, lunches and stuff. So it's a dangerous street. It's getting to be real busy getting in and out of this thing. It's
Yeah.
getting to be a real pain. So having a walkover bridge someday, but those are like $1 million.
Yeah, they're not
You
cheap.
know,
Yeah.
they're not cheap. You know, but they're on the school is another reason to have one there
Yeah.
because that road is starting to get big traffic, and it would
Mm-hmm.
be a benefit for the museum. You know, you
Right.
pay and you park one side, and then you can walk over to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's it all makes so much sense,
Yeah.
but getting everyone on the same page. You know, and right now, of course, I'm focusing a lot now on with Utah Raptor State Park getting ready to open up in 6 weeks.
Right. End of April.
You
Yeah.
know, and we're still sitting on, half the exhibits are in our lab. It's like, when are
Uh-huh.
you guys gonna pick this stuff up? They're doing the exhibits. We're not. We got
Uh-huh.
no money. We got hundreds of hours of work put into helping them. And the state parks hasn't put $1 toward the Utah Geologic Survey. That's, I look at that as part of our duties.
Hmm.
We support paleo everywhere in the state
Right.
as we can help out,
Hmm.
and that's Utah Raptor State Park is one of these things. But it's
Right.
like, it's opening in 6 weeks, you know.
Well, speaking on that though, the idea of helping out paleo wherever we can, that's my goal here too. Jim, how
Mhm.
can people who are watching right now, how can they help out with this project? What can they do? Let's have a call to action here.
Yeah, well, you've got the site. You need to post it.
Yeah.
Claire, if you're listening, I don't see your conversation on the side of the screen
Mm-hmm.
under Zoom, but basically, the donor site that they set up.
Right.
Get that out so people can make cash done because they do need money
Yep.
to do this. We need people. In fact, Andrew right now is like, we need more people. It's like,
Okay.
it's trying to juggle this stuff because, like, can we direct? When I go down, I'm not going to be pick and shoveling.
Sure.
Uh,
You're there to
at this
manage.
point in my
Yeah.
career, yeah. But supervising people that are pick and shovel and digging for fossils, because there's also careful work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
But as they open up this stuff now that they got power equipment, Andrew says we've opened up a big area of the bone bed, and
Nice.
it's like we need people to help open that up, and because the bones aren't like through the everything, so you got to
Right.
sit there and break the rock up, look for bone, and then wrap the bundle up and put it into a future cargo container. It's like,
Right.
where do you put this stuff?
We'll figure it
But
out. Yeah.
then, oh, we can throw this away. There's nothing in it. They got to
Hmm.
go through all this stuff. It's people, and then they've got the Amazon wish list. Post
Yep.
that some more.
We've got that in the chat right now too.
Gypsona bandages. I think the way they had it set up, it's like they bought two Gypsona bandages and then dropped it off the list.
I
And
think
it's
they've
like,
fixed that
that's an
now.
item where
Yeah.
you just got to keep doing Gypsona. There's certain supplies that are expendable, so you just got to
Hmm.
keep going.
Right.
They need more wheelbarrows. I don't know if they
Yeah.
put wheelbarrows back on the list, but they definitely, Andrew's like, they didn't have a single wheelbarrow out there last Thursday. Not
Jeez.
one. It's
Yeah.
like, what? You know, it's like, you guys got to move a lot of dirt. There's not,
Right. Just carry it by
everybody
hand.
doing this is bring your own wheelbarrow, bring your own shovel.
Yeah.
I mean,
Hmm.
it has been, because it's been, fire alarm going off. Is like, we got to do this yesterday.
Yeah.
It's, but the Amazon, so people can buy things off the list.
Hmm.
There's no question. I think they've got a couple of rotary jackhammers on the list.
Hmm.
They're like
Yep.
$250. They need at least a couple of those.
Hmm.
They got a generator. They got a cash donations and bought a generator. They can
Excellent.
run the Hiltis, or I'm not. Hilti's a brand name. I'm not sure what brand they're
Whatever
putting
jackhammer they've
on.
got. Yeah.
They're pretty happy with what they picked, though. They thought that would do
Great.
the job, and they need more than one. It's like, yeah, you need more than one of those.
Yeah.
And you can do amazing things with them. I was suggesting to Don we bring it down. He's like, they're awful hard on tools. If we lose ours, how are we going to get another one?
You've had yours for 20 years at this point, so yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, our generator's
Take good
25
care of
years
it.
old.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we take good care of our equipment, and that's what Don does. Don,
Hmm.
he manages all the field equipment, and
Oh yeah, Uncle Don.
and
He's
Don is,
fastidious.
yeah, Don is fastidious. I mean,
Yeah.
it's awesome what he does in terms of keeping our program. We're state of the art. I mean, people come out and join us on digs from other museums. Like, Jim, do you know how good your team is? Oh yeah, believe me.
Yeah.
I know I've got good people around me.
Oh yeah.
Make me
Yeah.
look good, and I appreciate that fact.
Yeah.
But it
Um.
really is. You gotta, Don, I've put him up for Employee of the Year so many times. It's like, when are you going to give him Employee of the Year? Because he deserves it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, he really does. He really deserves it.
What about volunteering at the site? If we've got anybody who's within, I don't know what kind of radius. St. George is
Yeah,
near
that
Las
that
Vegas. It's
number,
not too
yeah,
far
coming
from
down
Phoenix.
because basically at this point,
Yeah.
it's like you don't have to be an expert. Like, now they're getting equipment so they can start spreading out that big pile, which
Yeah.
has got slabs with tracks on them, rocks with bone, you know, chunks of rock with whole fishes or partial fishes, and they
Hmm.
just got to start going through this stuff and saying, okay, there's nothing in that, over the shoulder, so then they can bulldoze it aside and take it somewhere for fill.
Yeah.
You know, this is this is like all the stuff they bulldozed away when they built the school, because that's all in the fish beds,
Right.
the main fish bed stuff below the bone bed, but it's just whole fishes and things there and tracks.
Right.
And the school's a big footprint, the middle school, so it had a big footprint. And I didn't realize that this whole massive mound is basically all that site. They piled it up when they were just bulldozing and leveling the ground for the school.
Hmm.
It's like that's been sitting there since they built the school. So the stuff when it's sitting there, it's safe. It's as, but all of a sudden it's got to go,
Right.
and and unfortunately, they pulled the fire alarm. It has to go. It's as opposed to you've got a year to do it, or it's like you got to do it yesterday.
Hmm.
In terms of people volunteering, wanting to check in, of course you can find the place easy enough. Google Earth, it's on, St.
Yeah.
George site. You have a phone number that
Hmm.
for Jaleesa. She's the contact person.
Yeah. And we've got her
I'm in
email too. I
Salt
think
Lake
that's in
City.
one of our commands here. So contact
Yeah,
her, everybody, if you want to volunteer,
yeah,
and she can
she's
plug you
the
in.
contact person. Yeah,
Yeah.
uh, and she'd be out there hammering away more. She has been, but she's just had a baby, few months ago. So,
Hmm.
that's she's much better positioned to deal with the phones. And
Right.
Andrews, just turned 60. He's like, the kind of work that guy does
Yeah.
down there is like, you can't keep it up forever, Andrew. Uh,
He's working
as
really
much
hard right now. Shoot. It's,
uh,
yeah.
it scares me, just knowing his age and
Hmm.
knowing how hard he's working.
Right.
I mean, I've worked with that guy for 25 years, and he does not pace himself very well.
Right. Yeah. No, I could
He's
relate. I
he's
mean,
he's going
yeah.
overdrive.
Yeah.
He goes home and he's writing notes and
Hmm.
and doing other responsibilities. So it's yeah, he's been. I mean, he was 20 years. He was part time that place, and
Right.
I swear he was doing 60 hours a week for that entire 20 years.
Hmm.
I mean, Andrew, it's 24/7 with that guy. He goes home and he's up at midnight working on stuff.
Yep. It's
People
dedication.
just don't get it.
Hmm.
What they were, if he had not lived within, and he's still an hour plus away. His wife's, was
Long
dean
commute.
of undergrad research there at Southern Utah University.
Okay.
Uh, so they're pretty much at Cedar City. But he does that commute every day. In the morning,
Hmm.
drives down, back at night.
Right.
And before they discovered the site, they lived in a place in Parowan, so another 30 minutes north of Cedar City, and drove it every day for years before they
Hmm.
finally moved down to the south side of Cedar City. It's just
Jeez.
that commute,
Yeah.
and he's been doing it, and they got to appreciate what they've got in that guy. It would not exist.
Right.
I mean, Andrew's not listening, but there's a bunch of people putting him up for a pretty major national award right now.
So I've
For
heard.
his contributions. Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's very few people I think deserve it more. Uh, but the state of Utah has put it in our letter.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. And
Yeah,
I'm
it's already been submitted.
I'm really
Uh,
looking forward to getting down there myself. Hopefully, in a little over a week, I can get down there to St. George and start
no,
helping in
you've never
person.
been there. I mean, just
I
go
haven't
through the
been yet. I
exhibits.
haven't been, Jim. Yeah.
Just go through those exhibits.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
We'll do a
I
stream from
mean,
there so I can show
yeah,
everybody what it's
get a
like.
line, so but they do have Wi-Fi in there.
Great. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's you should be able to do it decently.
Excellent.
But
Yeah.
I mean, you could do a full show just in that exhibit.
Easily.
It's a
Probably a few.
it's a major exhibit.
Yeah.
And go up in the lab with them. Talk to the volunteers and look at some of those phytosaur skulls and things they're
Uh-huh.
working on. I mean, they got a couple impressive specimens.
Nice.
They're working on the big phytosaur skull. Right
Uh-huh.
as you come into the place, that was Don DeBlue found that with
Nice.
Andrew,
I've heard of
found it.
this one. Yeah.
They're like
Yeah.
10 feet apart, but Don found it.
Uh-huh.
If he found it, Andrew would have. But yeah, and they did a lot of the prep in their lab on that skull, and
Uh-huh.
then it was brought up. It's the real ones at the university
Right.
museum because it's from BLM land, so it
Uh-huh.
goes to a federal
Federal land. Yeah.
repository, Salt Lake City. But I was able to get that. Randy, we promised them replicas of this stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
we got Rob Gaston to reconstruct the skull, a little crunched on one side, but they, examples of all the teeth, everything, lower jaws,
Mm-hmm.
and where do you see it? Like the second biggest phytosaur skull in the world, I understand.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. We've got some big ones
Yeah,
at
it's beautiful.
Berkeley. Big
Yeah.
Rudiodon that was like sucker's like
Oh
five
yeah.
feet long.
Yeah. That's how
Yeah,
big
if
this
this
one
is anywhere
is.
close to that, it's gonna be
Oh, it's that size. It's
impressive.
probably the second longest one. What's her name at Virginia? Uh, Michelle Stockard, who's
Ah,
the Phytosaur person now.
uh-huh.
Michelle said to Randy or someone she thought it was the second largest skull.
Nice.
Now, you know, but it's
Something to
of a
look forward to
taxa
there,
that's
chat. Yeah.
much rarer than those other taxa.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it might be a new genus,
Uh-huh.
and we're pushing
Exciting.
make it Zionosuchus or something. It was
Be
found right on
great.
the edge of Zion National Park,
Yeah.
and we know it exists in Zion because Don and I found parts of it in
Mm-hmm.
Zion before they found that complete skull,
Hmm.
and Zion got a replica of it too.
Nice.
So because it is the most impressive fossil vertebrate from Zion National Park,
Very
that
nice.
exists. So they have it on exhibit at the, I guess the new East Entrance Visitors Center.
Hmm.
Visitor center and come in from the east side now,
Uh-huh.
which wasn't there last time I was in Zion.
Uh-huh.
We've done a lot of work there over the years, but they got that skull, and it got Zion to bug Randy. Like get Randy, just get. They already had a contract. Get it to Rob so they can replicate it and make the
Uh-huh.
skull. And that's what they'll exhibit because the real skull will be in the collections.
Right.
For study. And I mean, you'll see it. It is super impressive.
Looking forward to showing it off on stream. That's gonna be great.
Oh
And then
yeah, yeah.
hopefully
People don't
be
know
streaming
about it.
from the site as
It's
well.
the oldest phytosaur on the Colorado Plateau, apparently.
Is it really?
Yeah, that's what they say. And there's nothing this old anywhere. But Fight Forest, none of them have stuff this old. Yeah,
Impressive. The
yeah.
superlatives just keep coming.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
yeah. No,
yeah.
I'm really
Closely related
excited.
stuff occurs in Texas and Wyoming,
Uh-huh.
Paposia in Wyoming, and the Otis Ranch in Texas at the bottom of the Dockham. But those rocks of that age aren't present in the Chinle.
Uh-huh.
They're tied to the unconformity. Apparently, this is. We didn't know we had rocks this old in the St. George area.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
and they got bone beds there that still haven't even been touched on the edge of the park.
Yeah.
That I'm hoping this institution will deal with. It'll get a whole new biota,
Mm-hmm.
from the bottom of the Carnian or top of the next stage down, which is, I'm not sure, I can't remember what is older than Carnian, but
But I'm
yeah,
really
no,
excited to yeah, to show up and be able to stream from the site and show people how this work is going and help build hype for it. And then who knows what will turn up? Like bits of coelacanth, bits of lungfish, dinosaur bits,
well, hopefully
possibly,
they found
footprints.
another big skull of a fish Friday.
Yeah,
No,
nice.
they're finding stuff continuously.
And
I'm
this is
sure they
just the
get new stuff
beginning. I mean,
today.
think about when we've got a
Yeah.
big crew out there with a bunch of people working. This is exciting. It's a
Oh,
shame that it has
one
to
thing
happen
they
under these
need
circumstances,
are,
but
buckets.
yeah.
Those white buckets. They can use buckets. So if anyone's like wanting to go down there, and they have extra buckets somewhere. Bring
Okay.
buckets. It should be on
Uh-huh.
the Amazon list, but it's like, is that cost effective to buy buckets? But we were
Okay.
talking, because they find these ganoid scales of these
Yeah.
semionotids like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
They're, and I'm like, you just need to have people throwing them in the buckets, because
Right.
these could be giveaway things for kids in the future.
Sure. Yeah.
You have buckets full of these things.
What we need to do is get a local hardware store, Home Depot or Lowe's or one of these ones where they put the big logo on the bucket. Just donate 100 of them to the site, and that's free advertising for them because the
Oh
logo would
yeah,
be everywhere.
oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway,
I mean,
I'm
those are the things you don't even think of. Buckets, it's like,
exactly.
oh,
I'm seeing
you
that
know,
extension cords, gloves,
yeah, yeah,
ear protection, the safety
yeah.
goggles, all that
Oh,
stuff.
glue.
Yeah,
I mean, I
yeah.
think Andrew, they've made a big purchase of glue or acetone. I'm not
Nice.
sure how they're doing with acetone right now.
Glue is cheap.
Yeah.
It's just all these expendables.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Things
Keep
that you
telling
run
people,
through.
Duco glue. Remember the
Yeah.
tubes?
Uh-huh.
That's Butte Bar. Yeah,
Is it? That's boot bar,
it
really?
is now. It's a whole new formulation. Because remember in the
Oh.
old days, it was like Egyptian cement. The stuff turned to nitric acid
Huh. Uh-huh.
eventually. Why they stopped using it, Gliptol.
Yeah.
That's what the formula was in the old days.
Huh.
So, bad news, because it breaks down and turns into powder and nitric acid. Not
Mm-hmm.
something you want in your fossils, just the bonds would just go away.
Yeah.
But now it's basically butfar,
Huh.
B76.
Uh-huh.
A lot of people
Nice.
like to use, but that's the new formulation now. And it got such a bad name before. Everyone, oh, you don't use Duco. It's like, but it's B76 now,
I'm
and
glad
it's
you know
so
this, Jim, and
convenient.
getting the word out. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's all the
Um,
stuff. It was like Denver the other day with that black light. I want one of them.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I want one of those real bad. Like that.
You
Yeah, I
make your
need
own
one of
wish list
those.
there, Jim. Yeah, somebody would get it for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh yeah, because we got sites for the bone fluorescence really good.
Yeah.
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 That little velociraptor we found at the top of the yellow cat,
Mm.
which may be another new fauna, that Aya stuff, Andrew site,
Yeah.
Hippodraco, and that could
Uh-huh.
be a new fauna. Because Brooks has got a new site about 2,000 feet west of Utah Raptor Ridge, west of the mega block,
Mm-hmm.
site, but higher in the sequence, right under the poison strip sandstone,
Hmm.
within like 10 feet of it.
Uh-huh.
And it's a lot of ankylosaurs, a lot of polacanthines.
Uh-huh.
It's a new genus. They got a bone bed. At least 6 skulls
Ooh.
so far. The
Shoot.
brain cases are diagnostically different genus,
Uh-huh.
even though the overall triangular shape, they're polacanthines. But the brain case is so different. It's like, yeah, no one would put that in the same genus with that brain case.
Oh man,
Uh,
heard it here first, chap. We've got a new ankylosaur from the Cedar Mountain. That's
Another
exciting.
fauna. So
Yeah.
that's why, now I'm going like 5 or 6 faunas. That's another fauna.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's like, because below it you get Gastonia. It's still a higher yellow cat,
Mm-hmm.
but Bird's Eye, and we've got like 6 skulls of that thing. We know what their brain cases look like and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's not the same. you
Right.
know. It's like, and that's like one of the dominant animals. Like there's a different level up there.
Uh-huh.
Things are evolving. But there's millions of years. You always got to keep in mind. The yellow cat's at least 10 million years by itself, maybe 15.
Mm-hmm.
You add the poison strip, that's over 20 million, 25 million years,
That's nuts.
record.
Right.
That's huge. I
That's
mean,
easily
that's
twice as
like
long
the
as the
whole
Morrison.
upper Cretaceous record of Montana.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
whole record of Montana for the upper
Campanian and
Cretaceous, that
Maastrichtian.
kind of time interval.
Yeah.
And people just
Yeah.
don't get it. Some of this stuff we're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
It is like, oh, Jim, you guys have found it already. Oh, yeah. We found what Cope found when they were in there, those
Right.
first few years. I mean,
Uh-huh.
oh yeah, we got a lot of good stuff. It's made a lot of newspaper out headlines, but we haven't. It's just going to keep coming.
Uh-huh.
These discoveries. For years and years, decades and
That's
decades.
super exciting. And
You
Utah's
know?
such a special place like this. It's yeah, I've been missing it. I'm really looking forward to coming back out. And when are you going to be out at the site, Jim, down in St. George?
I'm heading out on the 21st.
Okay.
So I have a hotel room for the 21st, and I leave the 31st.
Nice. Okay.
So I'll be
I've got
there
to
for
figure
10
out my schedule,
days.
but we might overlap there for a bit.
Mhm.
And if so, I'll definitely try and get you on camera.
I know Don will be out just for the 5 days, the Monday through Friday. But I
Gotcha.
figured, just for working with volunteers and
Yeah.
IDing stuff, the weekends are pretty busy. So I'll stay on both ends the weekends,
Excellent.
mainly IDing stuff. I got, what is
Yeah.
this? That's what I'm there for.
Nice. Yeah, where you'd be
Yeah.
most useful. What do you think they'll have
Yeah,
me
that's where
do?
I'll be most useful. Yeah.
If you were in charge, Jim, what would you put me? What would you have me do?
Well, do your live streams,
Yeah,
report,
for sure.
dig some too, because I know you like to do that,
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Can't go out there and not dig.
but
Yeah.
document, the stuff and tell the world what's
Mm-hmm.
going on out there and show
Right.
them, do a day in the exhibits or,
Absolutely. Yeah. Looking forward to
because
it.
that's, the place deserves, more recognition than it's got. It's, when the sign's out there, it gets good, recognition. And of course, there's been SVP field trips both from Salt Lake and Vegas there,
Uh huh.
GSA trips and conferences. I mean, it's attracted a lot of scientific attention.
Mm-hmm.
So there aren't many scientists that don't know its existence,
Right.
but the public is still, they got a popular book, the
Mm-hmm.
tracks in deep time,
Hmm.
which you might be able to get through Amazon. I'm not sure.
I need to pick that up actually before I come out there. Yeah. Yeah. I'll look into
Yeah,
that.
Tracks in Deep Time
Okay.
by
Yeah. Yeah.
Jerry Harris and Andrew Milner.
Uh huh. Excellent.
And, and that's the book on the site. It was published about 10 years ago now,
Uh huh.
but a good book. But I want to try Christy, Sadler. I don't know if she'll ever do another dinosaur book after the Cedar Mountain book.
It's such an
But I
ordeal.
keep
Yeah.
trying to talk her into doing an early Jurassic, Dawn of the Dinosaurs. She did a great book on the Triassic.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Petrified
book's
Forest and all that.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a nice book. That's why I called her and said, "Would you be interested in doing a book on the Cedar Mountain?" Never
Yeah.
been done.
Yeah.
Popular book.
Nice.
Translate us scientist types and let the world know what we got.
Right. It's so
Yeah.
important to be able to,
Oh yeah, no,
reach
we need
regular people.
outreach.
Mm-hmm.
And the survey, we have outreach people, but they're also outreaching for everything: oil and gas, earthquakes,
Yeah.
landslides. I mean, the Great Salt Lake. We outreach a lot at the survey, and only
Mm-hmm.
have a handful of people doing outreach.
Right.
We're fortunate that we even have an outreach group.
Mm-hmm.
Because they do a good job. In fact, our outreach, our new got a new guy assigned to PR, video and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and public relations, and he'll be out there that week with
Nice.
us, with a couple people filming, or at least one person filming.
Excellent. That's really
We're going to
good.
document some stuff for, they'll be down there for like a couple days at the
Yeah.
most, right? Overnight, I
Yeah.
expect. But they want to document this. Like, yeah, we have been pretty involved down there. Going, yeah, we're about as big a reason that place ever happened as Andrew is.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, no, it'd be good to have some of this documented. You've never bothered before. I mean, I came to my assistant director came down with me there one day, and
Mm-hmm.
we had our governor at the time go down, and our Senator Bennett went down.
Mm-hmm.
I had a chance to meet with Orrin Hatch down there at the ribbon cutting. The representative down there, Scott Matheson. I mean, the lineup of politicians that have gone down there from the state level things, has been pretty good. I'm sure how much the city people know about what's
Mm-hmm.
going on there. But I hear the governor's going to be at Utah Raptor State Park opening,
Oh
which
wow.
would be
Okay.
really good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice.
you know. So that's, that's our hope. You get that kind of recognition because we need that.
Mm-hmm.
This stuff, as you know, does not get the attention it deserves, or that the
Yeah.
public thinks it deserves. When the public,
Sure.
why don't we know about this? I
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
just love
Yeah.
that. Every time I hear people say that, it's like, why don't we know about it?
Mm-hmm.
And you get that from people who live in St. George. I didn't know that was over there.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's astonishing. When I lived in Bozeman, we had people I'd meet every week to be like, I didn't know we had a museum here. Museum of the Rockies, you know? It's
yeah,
like, what else does Bozeman even have? Um,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah. No, it's one of the big attractions in St. George.
Yep.
It
Yeah.
really is. It's one
Yeah.
of the biggest attractions there. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of the international tour groups, that come to with, Japanese tourists or Dutch. A lot of Dutch tourists go through there too.
Mm-hmm.
Zion's one of our most popular national parks in Utah,
Right.
but they also people like to go to Vegas,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
And it's pretty close.
and it turns out St. George is a perfect lunch spot on your way to Zion from Vegas.
Nice. Yeah.
So a lot of those international tour groups stop at the track site as they're heading to Zion,
Mm-hmm.
or vice versa, and have their lunch there, and let their people, tour through the exhibit for an hour or so, take a break out the bus,
Right.
so, and those groups are still doing it,
Mm-hmm.
and that's still a major part of the visitation. But, the walk-ins from the people driving down the highway, oh, next up, there's a dinosaur site.
Right. Well, and on the
Really,
bright
you want
side
to check?
too, Andrew was telling me that their viewership is viewership, excuse me, using Twitch terms. Their
Yeah.
visitorship has been like doubled or maybe even tripled. It's increased significantly over the past few weeks because of this media coverage, because of the
Oh yeah,
excavation
no,
that's
he
going
says the
on.
parking lot's been full. He says it's
Yeah,
great
which is
because it's
really
been a
good to
long
hear.
time, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, you need signage. When I worked with Dynamation, we had a thing, we wanted our name in the newspaper once a week on
Mm-hmm.
something.
Nice.
It doesn't
Hopefully
always
something
have to be
good.
a new discovery, but we're doing some outreach thing. We're having something where kids are doing essays, and this kid won this prize, or
Yeah.
just something every week to
Uh-huh.
keep your community knowing you're there, and you're engaged with your community.
Yep.
And so many museums forget how important that part of what they do is.
Right.
Is keep that level of engagement up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we're doing a Boy Scout thing this weekend, or just just keep having stuff happen. And that's really important long term, because if you just sit back on your laurels, oh, we got a great site here,
Mm-hmm.
everyone will forget about it. They'll just,
Yeah.
oh, same old, same old. That's why they set up rooms for traveling exhibits in
Mm-hmm.
museums. We got a new exhibit. We
Bring
try to keep it
visitors in.
fresh. So you
Yeah.
haven't seen everything we got here.
Yep.
And when they get that
Justify people getting a
Scutellosaurus
membership
mount,
and coming back. Yeah.
set up in an exhibit, do
Mm-hmm.
a press release. We got a new
Exactly.
dinosaur,
Yeah.
and here's some teeth of what one of these things probably are like from out there in Warner Valley. So we know
Uh-huh.
these are in the area, and
I really wish
uh,
more paleontologists understood this concept and really kind of took it to heart that publicity is not necessarily a bad thing. Don't be scared of
yeah,
it. Yeah.
yeah,
You get that,
no, I
Jim.
mean it
Yeah.
really is. It's like, less selling out. I mean, what do you mean? The people that pay your salaries is who you're trying to talk to when you're doing this
Right.
stuff. You
Yeah.
go to our meetings, SVP is telling everybody what you did during your summer vacation.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, basically that's what SVP is, and it's
Yeah.
great.
Uh-huh.
That's how you make the connection scientifically with different people doing different things.
Mm-hmm.
But it's this stuff, and working with the media and working with the public. That's how we talk to the people that are paying our salaries.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't care if you're at a college or university, say, well, the students pay my salary. No, the reason they're students is they're interested.
Exactly.
You know, I
Yeah.
mean, it really is. Why is the public coming to your museum? Because they're
Mm-hmm.
interested. How do you keep them interested? That's why having an active program is important. We make new discoveries.
Yep.
This isn't dead, and so St. George or in Utah, we're making new discoveries all the time. That's a butt.
Yeah, sorry, it's one of the cats who lives here in the house with me. That's Sweetie Pie right there. She's really jonesing for some attention. But
uh,
yeah.
but it really
With
is. It's so important, and it's this stuff like what we've done. Just on social media
hmm
on this stuff. What you folks have been doing. The paper's starting to take serious. I mean, Andrew said
right.
I think the Tribune was going to interview him, or KSL. They're starting to get media coming down there.
hmm
This that creates this gestalt of work, and if you're not keeping this up, I would tell the director this should be your major job,
Hmm.
is to keep the public face going. I mean, Andrew's doing the work, and Andrew's a great public face,
Yeah.
but he's got to be doing the work, and when they ask him a question, he's available. I mean,
Yeah.
you
I
got
heard
to
he had an
direct people
interview
talking.
today. I was talking
Yeah.
to him on the phone. He said a news channel was coming down, I think, for a TV interview. So hopefully that went well. Andrew's actually here in the chat, I think. He said they moved a lot of rock today, but not a lot of fossils yet, I think is what he said. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, they got a backhoe. I know they're clearing
Yeah.
overburden,
Uh-huh.
you know, but he needs people. At least he told me that this morning. He says,
hmm
we need more people than I thought, and,
Yeah.
it's like, man, it's a big place.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. And once they really open up a lot of work area in here, it's like, and you got to get people moving through it pretty fast.
hmm
The big oversized chisels and the small sledgehammers, and crack up a layer, look at it. Is there anything in it? Oh, boom, over your shoulder. Some in it. Okay, wrap, then slow down, wrap it, jacket it, boom, move the jacket away. It's not how we like to operate,
Right.
but it's when
Time
you,
crunch
yeah,
paleontology.
when
Yeah.
you've got this kind of time crunch, you've got to be moving stuff
Yeah.
pretty fast. And very often it's like, well, there's some bones in here, but I can't tell you what it is. Maybe it's a dinosaur skull, maybe it's a coelacanth skull.
hmm
But it's like you find out later. Just get it
Yeah.
moving, go
Jacket
for
it,
the next one.
preserve it, set it
Yeah,
aside. Yeah.
go to the next one. We'll work on it in the lab later.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but as I can't stress more, we need to get them be a repository.
hmm
We need, because of some of the attention this has gotten.
hmm
We were trying to get it declared as a a paleo landmark this
hmm
session, and the whole deal with the legislators there locally, as I understand it, is they were going to try to get a couple million, 2-3 million for the buildings, as part of the, oh, we're now Utah's first paleontological landmark,
Right.
and get these buildings put up, you know get it going, boom, start cleaning it up, landscaping, doing what we got to do,
hmm
uh, and all of a sudden, boom, we're on to other things. And of course we have the national political changes that occurred as
Yeah.
well, that changes focuses. And we had $120 million less this year in our state coffers than last year.
hmm
It's like, oh, with inflation, you should always have more. What happened? It's
Yeah.
like, because that surprises Utah rarely has less money from one year to the next. So it's like,
hmm
what happened?
Yeah.
120 million less. You know,
That's not a small amount. Yeah.
no, it is. It's serious.
hmm
We're saying, yeah, we're looking 2-3 million is what we hope there, to really set that area across the road, in good shape to move forward.
hmm
And that's a lot of money when you're looking at that kind of
Right.
deficit. Unfortunately, they put more money into education and whatnot, try to keep, make the teachers realize they're appreciated,
hmm
which is real good, because we need to, keep the teachers happy. Not like they're holding some over our heads, but they deserve it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They really deserve it.
Well, we really
Yeah.
appreciate you, Jim. Holy cow. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, and thank you for your enthusiasm and all of your hard work. And I'm looking forward to seeing you down there, hopefully, in St. George in
Yeah, no, that'd be a good
a
time.
few
But
weeks.
even if you're not there when I'm there, it's like,
Yeah.
there's plenty, to do and cover.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you set up on site there and just chatting with the various volunteers and stuff. Sure,
Yep.
there'll be great stories and
I hope
things
so.
that
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
folks will be really interested in. Um, that's how this stuff moves forward. People
It
have
often is.
got to
Yeah.
realize, there's lots of ways to skin a cat. You know, and
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I want to be a museum scientist. Well, you can also teach in a medical school, teach
Sure.
anatomy, or you
Yeah.
can write children's books, or
Lots of
do
different ways to
paleo
be a
art,
paleontologist. Yeah.
or there's a lot of different ways to be a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And as scientists, we need to show respect to all the people doing the different things, which
Right.
isn't always the case.
Mm-hmm. No, that's
um,
definitely true. And that also includes volunteers, local community members,
mhm,
you know, docents, museum board members, visitors, you know, anybody. So yeah, I'm really hoping that this will be kind of a showcase for how to become involved with paleontology too, because it's not just, you
mhm,
know, it's not just becoming a paleontologist. That's not the only way to be involved with
mhm.
paleontology. There's so
Well, you
many
look
other
at the
ways.
thing. Yeah, you got like Tule Springs in
Mm-hmm.
Vegas. So they've got a major paleo resource. And I guess they're getting lots of people in Las Vegas and the community around there
Mm-hmm.
becoming volunteers and actively involved with that. The Prehistoric Museum in Price has active programs going.
Right.
I mean, it's like you say you build it. I've been trying to get a trilobite museum going in Delta, Utah,
Yeah, yeah.
part of all these soft-bodied communities. It's the Great Basin Museum
Uh-huh.
expanded, so they have like a paleo wing.
Yeah.
Say, well, yeah, let's take all these incredibly ornate little trilobites
Uh-huh.
and using photogrammetry or laser scanning and blow them up to foot
Yeah.
across and start
Uh-huh.
exhibiting this stuff at a large scale. Like, okay, this is all these little animals that got life going
Uh-huh.
out here. This radiation to the camera. Boom, let's blow it up big.
Uh-huh.
So you can see, and that's not that hard. I mean,
No.
stuff you
I
can
could do
print
that.
on your scanner, printing trilobites to like your max size,
Yeah.
that's big,
Yeah.
and if you have really high resolution 3D models, I mean, think of
It's
all
not
that
difficult
like
to do nowadays. Yeah.
Moroccan stuff,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that stuff would 3D print beautifully.
Oh
You
yeah.
get all those very spiny and ornate critters. I yell continuously at these trilobite people that post all these amazing pictures. Let's get this stuff scanned,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah.
So that people can print this stuff and appreciate it that aren't,
Mm-hmm.
out there. I know you had a lot of hard work to dig through those limestones and find that trilobite, and often they pay to have someone else prep it, the
Sure.
really good stuff. But let's scan this stuff and then blow them up big so
Mm-hmm.
people can really appreciate it, walking by. And I say, yes, let's take an Olenelloides nevadensis, which is a real spiny
Uh-huh.
uh, you trilobite you get in the West Desert. It gets pretty big, a couple inches long, which is for trilobite pretty big. But you scan that thing, big midline spines on his back and stuff, 3 foot, 4 foot long. It's the logo for that museum. It's that logo piece,
Uh-huh.
and put that on your sign,
Yeah.
blown up, huge.
I love it.
I mean, because you can do it.
Yeah.
It's like, why are we doing this stuff? This is the future.
I agree.
It really
Yeah.
is. And giant, beautiful trilobites and soft-bodied organisms. Yeah, I mean, I know you would love a big Anomalocaris to hang on your wall there.
Oh yeah. That'd be
Like, someone,
incredible. Yeah.
really do it accurately, scientifically based, 3D model of it, you
Mm-hmm.
know, life size. You
It's
know,
doable. Yeah.
I mean, it's very doable. It's like, I can't do it,
And
and
this is one of the
but
things that,
people can do this and do it
yeah,
well.
I think that's one of the things that I get most excited about in paleontology is just that there's so many things that are worth doing that haven't been done yet. There's so many low-hanging fruit still available.
Oh
There's
yeah.
and the general public, you tell them about this stuff and they get really excited about it.
Hmm.
It's there's so much potential, so much opportunity. I, it kind of astonishes me that we don't have more of this going on. But We can. It's not that difficult, and that's
No, it
one of the things
isn't.
that I'm.
I mean, doing a trilobite museum where you work with the volunteer collectors
Hmm.
to scan like really great specimens and
Yeah.
then blow them up big and, have an exhibit of all this stuff blown up to, 10x or something like that,
Hmm.
and just, that's not that expensive to do.
Right. Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
it's very reasonable,
Hmm.
and it's just like, well, let's do it. Our West Desert, we got, you've got a copy of our trilobite book, I think.
Yeah.
You have, yeah.
You sent it to me. Yeah. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's an amazing thing, what we
Yeah.
got out there. And there are new things discovered every day,
Right.
out there. I mean, there's many publications on Utah Cambrian stuff regularly. By far, there's probably more than what's coming out on our dinosaurs. Except it doesn't get the attention.
Right.
You
I
know,
hardly ever hear
a
about it.
loose,
Yeah.
weird,
Yeah.
funky arthropod of some sort.
Uh-huh.
Those things are coming out like every week from
Right.
out there.
Well, it just
And
goes to show how important that kind of attention is, though, and like what we put the spotlight on with things. And uh, yeah, I thank you, Jim, for helping with this, for helping get the word out about it. And um, yeah, I realize you probably gonna go in a little bit, right? It's gonna be after 5 your time.
is it? Yeah. I mean, I'm sitting at home, so it doesn't matter to me. I mean, this is
Okay,
this
don't have
is
the boss
work. I
looking
mean,
over your shoulder. Yeah.
yeah, this is work. I mean,
Yeah.
when I get yelled at, are you gonna eat dinner or what? I'm always getting yelled at because I just work till, someday I'm like you. I just keep going and
Yep.
I'm on a
Yep.
roll, on this
Yeah.
stuff. But basically, you look at stuff, you've seen my dinosaur Jurassic egg site talk, didn't you?
Yeah.
I
Mm-hmm.
posted it, yeah. The one Alberta put up, the Alberta Paleo Society. They did a
Mm-hmm.
really nice job. And I updated some stuff over the UFOP one. So there's two
Nice.
versions. Alberta might be a little better than UFOP,
Uh-huh.
which was live. The Alberta one was a Zoom talk, but I think it's a little better and a little clipped out, but not bad. But the low hanging fruit there, all that stuff is like
Yeah.
one thing after another. It could be a thesis project. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, contrasting what we know about, these are the oldest nesting sites in North America,
Mm-hmm.
period. I mean, these are the old, we don't have any prosauropod nesting sites
Yeah.
discovered yet, and basically this stuff, in contrast to what we know about the stuff in Montana and Alberta, very different. Dryosaurus behaviors were, vastly different and
Then
what you
Maiasaura
would
and
consider
Hypacrosaurus. Yeah.
less sophisticated than what we see for Hypacrosaurus and Maiasaurus and,
Mm-hmm.
these things up north. And that's what you expect. If they're 70 million years older, so you would expect this, simpler systems with more eggs,
Sure.
probably. They're probably having more young.
Mm-hmm.
But some of that stuff, I can't wait to see Bach, and I'm going to be giving a talk in June at the Permian Fest in Texas.
Okay.
And I'm not talking about the Jurassic Cretaceous boundary.
Yeah.
I told them I work on the Permian. And, oh no, Jim, we want you to talk about your stuff. Okay.
Nice.
But Bacher will be there because I know he's giving a talk right after me. And it's like, Bob, you might have been right on live birth and Morrison sauropods.
What?
Then you have not seen my talk or haven't paid
I don't
attention.
remember that part, Jim.
Yeah, it's near the beginning. I talk about, we don't have any sauropod eggshell, not a fragment in the Morrison.
I thought we
And it
did at
turns
this point.
out,
I
and
guess I'm
I've
wrong.
been
Yeah.
researching this with colleagues around the world.
Yeah.
All the sauropod eggshell, all of it,
Uh-huh.
is Titanosaur eggshell from the Cretaceous.
Hmm.
There are no Jurassic eggshell sites for sauropods.
What
All
about
Cretaceous.
Massospondylus or
Well, prosauropods, but remember they have soft-shelled eggs anyway.
yeah, yeah.
They're not
So
solid eggs.
that's probably the basal character
And we're
is
now realizing soft-shelled eggs are probably the basal character.
for dinosaurs as a whole. Yeah. Yeah.
Titanosaurs developed hard-shelled eggs
Uh-huh.
within sauropoda, apparently.
Uh-huh.
And they start having fewer young, like 10 young in the, eggs in a nest.
Sure.
They definitely have fewer. They're not like Maiasaur or Oviraptor eggs. A lot more young in those nests.
Uh-huh.
Dryosaurus certainly the same way. Lots more babies.
Mm-hmm.
but so they're having less young, big, soccer ball size eggs.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact we have no eggshell and no little baby, no baby sauropod, like baby titanosaur size sauropods in the Morrison. We
Yeah.
have things that'd be animals that'd be like 3 or 4 foot long.
Uh-huh.
All of that smallest sauropod centra that I know of from
Mm-hmm.
babies are like a centimeter, 2 centimeters long. The
Mm-hmm.
vertebrae.
Right.
That's not something hatched out of an egg.
No. Yeah.
So Bob's whole theory says they have this big birth canal. They're having live birth, a few young that are born at 500 pounds.
Uh-huh.
The fossil record does not dispute that as a possibility. It's a
We can't
hypothesis. There's no
falsify that
evidence
yet, I
for it.
guess. Yeah. Yeah.
But the eggs the titanosaurs lay
Mm-hmm.
are only in that clade. Diplodocids might have all had live young, for all we know. I mean, basically, Bob has not been proven wrong.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean,
Interesting.
because we all, when they found, oh, we have sauropod eggs, Bob's an idiot. Bob, the data in the Morrison,
Uh-huh.
which has got the highest diversity of sauropods of any formation in the world, there's not a piece of sauropod eggshell anywhere, or a baby like hatchling out of an egg size sauropod anywhere.
Yeah.
So if you had a nest, even if they were soft shelled eggs, they were just having soft shelled eggs hatching. And it might be for an animal that big, soft shelled eggs wouldn't hold up. They would
Mm-hmm.
die because they would just collapse under their own weight. So they
Hmm.
might be forced to withhold, and have viviparous young.
It's a really interesting idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's just been coming to me as I worked on that thing. I'm like, holy cow. I started out Foster and Matt Weddle. I started, quizzing the sauropod guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we really don't have anything. And so, yeah. And I've been around this stuff for a while, and I certainly haven't seen anything.
Uh-huh.
It's like, it's reset the bar. So what Bob says in Dinosaur Heresies
Yeah. I remember
is
that
as
diagram you had. Yeah.
potentially legitimate now as it was then, except because we found those eggs. We said, well, all sauropods have eggs. And Bob's wrong. And now we're realizing the background state is soft-shelled eggs.
Uh-huh.
Can you have a soccer ball size soft-shelled egg?
Yeah, I don't know. There's certainly
Yeah,
no animals today do that, not on land.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. The
yeah,
big
that's a
snakes
really
have,
interesting question. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
No, it really is. I mean,
mhm.
this is the fun part about what we do.
Right.
Is
We're given very limited
there's
information. What can we figure out?
Yeah,
What can't we?
and
And yeah.
but you can't get into the flavor of the month too much. Flavor of
Hmm.
the month, hard shelled eggs and sauropods. I mean, I poo-pooed Bob. Oh, yeah, and even Bob, people ask him about it, and he just like didn't even want to answer the question. You
Hmm.
know, and it's like, I want to bring it up, and Bob stop. Bob, you might have been right. He'll love it. He'll love it. Yeah.
He will. Yeah. Yeah.
you
Nice.
know?
Um, oh,
But
switching gears here for a minute. I almost forgot I was going to ask you earlier, Jim. One of the questions that I've been getting a lot about, getting back to St. George, the
sure.
trackways. How do you get dinosaur trackways preserved, especially at the bottom of a body of water? This is something that confuses a lot of people, and I
Well,
think
the
it'd be great to get a.
trackways, yeah, the trackways that we're seeing, the real in the building,
Mm-hmm.
those were not in the lake.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen the pictures
Yeah.
of the rolling mega ripples, and I've published on it, and I
Yeah.
harp on stuff Andrew doesn't harp on, because
Mm-hmm.
I do have a lot more of a said think part of my body too.
Hmm.
Said processes and what are they doing and what are they telling us. But
Mm-hmm.
those mega erosional mega ripples, like the squatting dinosaur,
Yeah.
is probably coming out of the lake, going up on this big, it's a big sandbar, that thick sequence
Mm-hmm.
that they're peeling back, and walks up on that sandbar and sits down to sun itself, dry off.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it gets up, it kind of slips, probably a little bit of an algae scum, on the stuff, it's on the side of the lake, but exposed. You can
Sure.
see how water drained off. The waves would come up and then drain off down between the mega ripples. You can see
Mm-hmm.
little structures showing how it drains down back into the lake. Well, was walking along over these mega ripples. Whenever we went up the slope, the tail would drag. When it went over the crest, going back down a mega ripple, no tail drag. Tail
Mm-hmm.
drag every time they went up. I mean, so that they're holding their tail up. It's just they're going up and down and these things have compacted from
Right.
what they were originally when it was sand. It was probably an algal coating that helped hold things together on that surface. Algal scum binding the sand grains to some degree. But that animal sitting there, I'm sure it was just sitting on the side of the lake, sunning itself. The
Uh-huh.
tracks underneath are in this rubbery clay, and that's impressed. But when we look at the tracks, what we see are just big Ubrani's tracks
Okay.
in
It's a
the
big
red
theropod
clay.
dinosaur, yeah.
Yeah, and it's sinking through the clay because the clay was dry. They're mud cracks.
Mm-hmm.
It was dry clay, firm, but rubbery deeper down. Clay gets, big thick clay, it's gonna
Yeah.
be rubbery. But these animals are punching through this. So you get the tracks, and then they filled with sand. But one of the things we see at the bottom of that bed, which was formed the sandbar,
Mm-hmm.
was formed by waves going along shore along the side of the lake, and just dumping sand in along the shoreline. Well, sand filled these tracks. Well, if we look at the tracks, the big tracks, there are some ground ladder tracks on that surface.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of them
They're in the
is
Ubrani's
in
tracks, right?
in a Ubrani's track,
Yeah.
or they're in a flute cast. They're big scours
Mm-hmm.
that cut down, and they cut down to where we get these casts of salt crystals that might have been gypsum. They're triclinic. They're not cubes. They're not salt,
Mm-hmm.
but freshwater salts, maybe trona, or something, which are also triclinic. Borates. Who knows? Whatever they were, they dissolved out.
Sure.
So they filled with sand. So it had to be very soluble. I think more soluble than gypsum. I'm betting they're like borates, like in 20 mule stream stuff in Death Valley.
Mm-hmm.
But these little triclinic crystals, it cuts down, the crystal dissolved, and then they fill with sand. But in those scours, we have some growladder tracks where it's
Nice.
scoured down into the softer clay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we're getting these things. The swim tracks, remember this clay was real rubbery,
Okay.
you know, so they cut into it, and the sands were moving. They're in the current area. You have this big sandbar, so you have nearby sand. And then, in fact, you stood on a beach when there's currents and the
Mm-hmm.
water's like trying to erode out from under your feet. That's kind of how I picture it. There was like sand moving.
Huh.
At the same time, we have tool marks and stuff, and we
Uh-huh.
see the bulk of the swim tracks. These growladder swim tracks, largely they're all moving opposite the direction of current.
Hmm.
So they're walking off the edge, and you can see the way the thing drops down. They
Uh-huh.
stepped into deeper water with this current, longshore current, and all of a sudden they're floundering. They're starting to get pulled away, drifting. So
Uh-huh.
I'll say that's why I like to call them floundering tracks.
Right.
And they're
Yeah.
all like, trying to get back, going, get out of there, and they're fighting the current. So
Mm-hmm.
they're going opposite. The big Ubrani's tracks into that stuff. And there's a couple big Ubrani's. They don't even pay attention to the direction of that current, because they're still probably knee deep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for them. So they're just walking across some of it. So you get their track, but they cut into that rubbery, firm clay, and probably immediately getting filled with sand.
Hmm. So
You
immediately those
cut
swim
in, and then
traces are getting filled with sand, and then that's why you find a
as they're
difference in the
being made,
lithology
I
level.
think it's almost
Yeah.
simultaneous.
Uh-huh.
That you have this current, sand's part of the current. So you
Uh-huh.
cut down into it, and all of a sudden sand starts accumulating in those
Right.
cuts. But we found places where there are whole toes that go down into that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you could tell, when they're digging them, they're filled with sand. But all of a sudden the toes pinched off because it didn't completely do it, and the clay went back together and closed it off.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a end of a toe of a dinosaur preserved as a sandstone cast.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all it is. Oh, I found a dinosaur toe.
So how does it necessitate drying out first before it can be preserved? How do you get this
Well,
stuff
that's
actually liquefied?
the lower level. They're definitely mud cracks.
Right. So
You know,
mud
you can look
cracks
at
show
those
us that,
surfaces.
that everything actually dried out, but
Yeah, but the swim tracks and stuff that
uh-huh.
happened in the lake,
Right.
and but it's happened into that same firm clay layer. Remember this,
Uh-huh.
So But the if you look at those sites, they don't quite have the mud track, or they might have traces of the mud cracks, but it's
Mm-hmm.
eroding into it, scouring. You've got the lake has
Right.
expanded over, and giving the sandbar, which might have moved, onto the shore, as the lake levels expanded. And it's a
Sure.
big lake. Remember, like Lake Erie side. So, you've got big sand. Look at the scale of those mega ripples.
Uh-huh.
They're tens of meters across and at heights
Right.
of multiple meters.
Mm-hmm.
So these are big features. This was a big lake.
Mm-hmm.
People, how'd you get all those big fish? It's not a puddle. It's not a pond. You look at the Morrison, you see a little bit of water. It's a pond.
Right.
You look at this thing, you're looking at a lake. The only reason it doesn't just keep going, is we're at the edge of the outcrop belt. We just catch the
Mm-hmm.
northern rim of it. But that lake could have gone all the way across the Grand Canyon region for all we know.
Jeez.
And it's
Huge.
fresh water. Everything tells us it's fresh water.
Is that where
So,
the current is coming from? It's just from the size of the lake there?
the lake,
Um,
yeah. I mean, they sink ships in the
right.
Great Lakes, remember,
Yeah. Yeah.
big
Edmund
storm. Yeah.
Fitzgerald and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people don't
Yeah.
think of this. These are not puddles.
Right.
These are, freshwater inland seas,
Uh-huh.
and this, and when it was dry, like during Dinosaur Canyon deposition, it was
Mm-hmm.
like the Okabonga Delta in Africa.
Uh-huh.
So you have this big river system going up the Zuni Sag, and as it gets into this area, and all these sand dunes, the Wingate Sand Sea,
Mm-hmm.
mostly to the east, gets in there and it just, evaporates into the floodplain
Hmm.
like the Okabonga. And during the rainy season, this thing was probably a pretty amazing delta,
Huh.
you know,
Okay.
but
But kind of
and the
seasonal
dry
is what we
it
should
would
be
it
thinking
dry
about.
out completely. But the
Uh-huh.
lake itself, we see in the Whitmore Point. Remember, that's at the base of the Jurassic.
Uh-huh.
Is that because the big wet interval we see in China, everywhere that they decide to camp? The big end of the Triassic event
Right.
is
Yeah.
that the lake we're seeing there is still tied to the recovery, like we see at the base of Cedar Mountain.
Hmm.
We got like a whole sequence of paleosols showing that it took million or half a million years or so to go back to normal.
Uh-huh.
We have, you get the base, you got a kaolinite, this leached out, pure white porcelain clay and quartz
Mm-hmm.
sand. Everything else is gone, dissolved away, leached into the groundwater. Then you get into those iron rich, manganese rich soils
Uh-huh.
that are still wet, but they're not as wet as the kaolinite bed. And then you go up a bit higher and you get the histosols, the silicified peat beds,
Okay.
so you're into that environment. So slowly it's getting better and better drained, but that's happening through meters of section. Each one of those
A long time.
paleosols is taking thousands or hundreds of thousand years to form.
Right.
So, and we've seen this down near Bluff, Utah, Blanding, the same
Mm-hmm.
sequence. We've got it up at Dinosaur National Monument now, up in Rainbow Park. We've got it on the east side of the Buckhorn River on I-70 now.
So this is a
We've
big
got it clearly
regional
at,
thing. Yeah.
Ruby Ranch Road, Doling's Bowl.
Uh-huh.
Basically, during the Buckhorn River system, which is like the Colorado,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
draining up the axis of the old Sundance Sea
Mm-hmm.
depression, on either side, you had a floodplain. And at the base of the Cretaceous, when you had this big river, cobbles as big as footballs, big
It's a
rocks,
lot
you
of
know,
energy in that river.
that are moving 100 miles from their source where,
Right.
it's like the Colorado. It's a big river
Yeah.
going up there. And on the side, we see these very wet soils at the base getting drier and drier until we're back to semi-arid salt-rich soils like we see in the Morrison. It goes back,
Mm-hmm.
I think, I used to say, oh, that's the beginning of the severe thrust belt. Now I'm
Uh-huh.
thinking that's going back to normal.
Right. Huh.
No,
Interesting.
this is like cutting edge. I mean, I love it. It's like it's
Right.
coming together. And I just wish I was younger to do more follow-up stuff. I got to,
Uh-huh.
say every time I go to a meeting, I'm trying to hand the ball off to younger people, because this
It
stuff
really is
is,
exciting though. Just
oh,
yeah.
it is. I mean,
And here
that's
I
why
should
Japan and NHK, Japan's coming out this summer, and BBC, both to dig with us at Dong's Bowl.
Oh,
Different,
really? So they're gonna have film
yeah,
crews out there with us.
they're going
Okay.
to be filming with us on the Jurassic Boundary K-base. Yeah.
I hope that means like
North America, they don't take it as serious, but in Europe and
yeah,
in Asia, they're taking what I'm saying a lot more seriously.
very nice. Yeah.
Which
No,
it's always been that way with me. I mean, China used to always pay to bring me to China.
right.
It's hysterical. The way I'm treated in the U.S. versus overseas. Japan. I mean, Spain. Paying to fly me out. England flying me.
Uh-huh.
I don't. It's like whatever. I'm an old
Yep.
man. I've been living this life for a long time, so I'm used to it. It's just comic.
Yeah, no,
It's like the Muslims blowing up the Buddhist, statues, or in Cairo they totally ignore their Egyptian, kingdom heritage, anything
uh-huh.
pre-Muhammad, well, whatever. It's like it's incredible. Everyone in the world looks at Egypt as this incredible, you know, place of antiquities. But
Mm-hmm.
locally, yeah, let's rip off these things and sell them. It's in their backyard. They don't, and that's exactly the way Utah is.
Right. Yeah.
It is.
Now
It's
I
the same. It's our backyard. It's not. It's the same old. Who cares? And it's like if you lived anywhere else, you'd be looking at Utah going, "Wow."
I mean that's why to a certain extent it's our job to get people excited about this and tell
Yeah,
them about it because yeah, the word just isn't
yeah. The
getting out
BBC
otherwise.
coming into film wakes some people up.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. It
it's
legitimizes
what
things in
it
a way that
takes.
gets people to
It's
pay
media
attention.
attention
Mm-hmm.
that alerts people that, oh, there's something going on. Maybe I should look into this.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's comic, and as old as I'm getting, it's like I've got a couple of years left till I'm retired. The
Mm-hmm.
most at this point. I'm as desperate to make sure someone good replaces me. And I'd love to see someone come and overlap a little bit, so
Right.
we can really hand the ball off, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel too much.
Uh-huh.
But man, anymore. It's like I don't care. It's like I'm at the end of my career, folks. I'm in my 70s. I hope to publish some of these things. I've got a bucket list of publications. It's way too long. I'm trying to get done.
Mm-hmm.
And like today, I got 2 sentences written. But I'm getting phone calls from media, and I'm, dealing with,
Mm-hmm.
folks relative to Krista's book and
Right.
relative to the Utah Raptor State Park. There's a lot going on,
And
and I
paleontologizing
do
too.
this too. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
you
We
guys.
really appreciate your
Yeah,
time, Jim.
yeah. Well,
It's
it's
such a gift.
believe me, you're not but there's a lot going on this spring.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, the BBC's calling on us all the time now because they're getting ready in April. They premiere Walking with Dinosaurs.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we got a whole hour episode of that show.
Mm-hmm.
That they're going to premiere in London in April, late April will be ours, or maybe it'll be early May, depending. I don't know what number show we are. I would
Mm-hmm.
think we'd be like number 2 or 3.
Hmm.
That they're going to start in the Jurassic in Portugal.
Hmm.
And that stuff, which will be worth watching.
Yeah.
Lucia Titan is one of the stars, which may
Nice.
have been what gave rise to Cedarsaurus.
Uh-huh.
You know, no, they're not
I'm
going to say that
I'm
in
looking
their
forward
show.
to it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it'll be good, but it'll be PBS
Mm-hmm.
is doing it in June.
Walking with dinosaurs.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, and they're adding like 12 minutes to each episode because this is the commercial BBC channel.
Nice. Okay. So we'll get a
Yeah,
longer version here in the States and
yeah,
we'll
they had a PBS guy come out and film with us as well, side
more
things.
footage
So
of you and
there'll be
Don and the
stuff
rest of the
more with the
crew.
Utah
Josh.
Raptor block and
Yeah.
and filmed with us quite a bit down at BYU with
Nice.
the skeletons and they get to share some of that too. I don't know if they did. I've actually seen the episode without the
Mm-hmm.
final narrator. So it's like I don't know if they showed any of that stuff, but that stuff will be on the US version that
Excellent.
PBS
Okay.
does. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, so
It
it
better
should
be good
be.
because that's why I couldn't stream and at, at the site for the past 2 years. That
Well,
contract
if
that
they
they
come
had.
out
So
this summer to Doling's Bowl, they got to mess with you.
we got to talk to
Don't
them because I can't be
don't
out
worry
there.
about it. When they're dealing with stuff. They're not going to be there the whole time,
Okay.
or anything. We won't bring it up because I don't give a damn. It's like you want,
I
I don't.
appreciate that,
I'm
Jim.
not.
Thank you.
Josh is. I mean, there are small
Yeah.
museums that are starting off. We're the Utah Geologic Survey. This stuff is side stuff to us.
Yeah.
Compared to the overall picture of geology of Utah.
Hmm.
But it's like, yeah, no, we're happy to have you here. And I don't think Japan's gonna worry
Oh no.
because their
Yeah.
show will be completely in Japanese.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll it's the way that, I mean, I've done specials in Japan and
Uh-huh.
Spain and Mexico before. It's always, or Germany. I had a big German thing at one time. It's always great. You're talking and they lower your voice so you can still hear yourself. And
Hmm.
then it's all someone speaking
Voiceover in
what you're
Japanese.
saying
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
German or in German. Yeah.
Oh, in German. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've done in German. I've done this with a lot of countries over the years.
Nice.
People just don't read because they don't see it in the US. So none of
Right.
these people know how much international attention we get.
Should make like a
They don't.
big
They don't
compilation
care.
reel of that. Yeah. Yeah. And just play that
I,
on loop, in the lobby at the
yeah, no.
DNR.
Here I am in Spanish. Here I am in German.
Yeah.
Different shows.
Uh-huh. The
Like,
world
oh
of Jim
man.
Kirkland.
Uh, I mean, Mexico. One of the big networks in Mexico came when we opened the Dynamation exhibit in Fruta.
Uh-huh.
They carried that live in Mexico City.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
And yet people
it's
locally in
like people
Colorado are
just,
like, "What? What's going on?" They're like
yeah. Well, what's that?
unaware.
Who cares? Yeah,
Yeah. Again, that's the thing is there is a public hunger for this kind of thing. Like people want to hear about it and it's just not getting covered in the US and it's really frustrating. So
oh
anything that
yeah,
I can do to help get the word out and help raise the
yeah. No,
profile
we
for projects
appreciate it.
like
That's why I
this,
called
I'm all
you on
about it.
this stuff in St. George because
Yeah.
I know you've got a responsive audience of people that are are interested in this stuff, and it really we have to get the word out to the public
Hmm.
because any scientist has as many problems as we've got.
Yeah.
And we're all in the same boat. It's like, oh, even if you're Yale or something or Harvard, it's not like they're rolling in dough in their science programs.
Unfortunately, they're
You
not. Yeah.
know, I
Uh-huh.
know this. I know these guys, and and maybe not. You would think everyone thinks they are.
Hmm.
It's all
Just
like,
because
oh,
their
damn,
university has a $50 billion endowment doesn't mean that
yeah,
they actually have any real funding for their paleontology program. It's
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It's a total separate thing.
yeah,
Law
yeah.
school's doing pretty good.
I'm sure. Yeah, yeah, and the business school and yeah,
And the
yeah.
school of medicine, but
Hmm.
some things are not doing as well. It's just
Right.
the way of it. It really
Yeah.
is. It's the way the world works,
We've got to hold a
and
bake
we
sale
need
in
to
order to be able
teach
to
things.
buy a wheelbarrow. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I know. I couldn't believe it. We got two wheelbarrows, but we discovered that's not enough.
yeah.
We're
Well, we've got
filling them
more on the
way
wish list
faster
now,
than.
and hopefully, if people have
Yeah,
got the
those
wherewithal and the
wheelbarrows aren't
desire,
that expensive.
yeah.
Yeah, those hammer drills aren't cheap, but
Hmm.
they're not gigantically. I mean, you look at that; it's like one of the biggest things they're looking for. It's we're hoping to get the cargo container as a loan from a
Hmm.
construction company. Just because very often they have multiple ones laying around. They
Hmm.
bring out to job sites, and you know, it's like, yeah, if you could park one over there, it could be really
It'd help.
handy.
Yeah. Andrew is in the chat right now too. He was saying earlier that
Yeah, I'm not seeing the chat. Yeah, what do you
they've
say?
got a big fish. I don't know if that's new today or what, but it sounds really exciting. And then, sorry, the
Probably new today.
particular font color is kind of hard to pick out here in the chat, so I'm looking for it. Everybody's names has got, you know, different font
Yeah, different
colors,
colors.
so it's a little bit difficult sometimes to pick out ones that aren't especially vibrant. But I think Andrew posted it when
Andrew,
they
tell us
found
more
it
about the
live.
fish.
Yeah. I don't know anything about it yet, but I'm excited to hear about it once we do.
Well,
I'll have to
Andrew,
talk
if
to
he's
him.
on, Andrew, tell us more.
Yeah, yeah. If he might be
Yeah,
looking at
you're
his
on.
phone like
Tell
on
us.
site
Put it
right
in chat.
now. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, yeah. But
yeah. Send
anyway,
Danny a picture.
yeah, yeah. He did send me some pictures
Yeah,
over the weekend, so I'll share those with everybody in
yeah.
a few minutes after we're done with this interview. And yeah, yeah. I
Yeah, I
wish
mean,
I
they're
weren't.
gonna find so much.
Yeah, no,
2 months of
absolutely.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I wish I weren't so busy right now, or I'd be out there right now. But I've got some
Mhm.
stuff coming up this week. I've got to give a talk on Friday. I might be able to live stream that. I've got a little bit of traveling to do this week. I'm taking 2 days off from stream to go travel and do some other stuff. It's got a lot going on,
Mhm.
but I'm gonna make it out there to St. George as soon as I can, and uh, yeah, do whatever I can to help out. So, oh,
Yeah.
and
Well, we appreciate it.
Andrew says right there, we just found the fish. Very exciting. Andrew, is it a
Yeah.
ray finned or lobe finned fish? I hope it's a lobe finned fish. We've got not only a coelacanth on the wall today, but there's my Queensland lungfish over there too, 3D printed. We're all about lobe
I'm
finned fish.
betting it's a big semionotid because they had
Yep.
semionotids in there. That's why they got the wear on the teeth.
Uh huh.
They were 2-3 foot long.
Right. Yeah.
So we know
Yeah.
they're big ones. As Andrew said, they have scales that are an inch across.
The seminodes were ones like
We haven't found a
Sheenstia
whole fish.
from England, right? Like Baryonyx was eating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah. Those
those are
guys are,
ray finned fishes, right? They're related to gar and stuff.
yeah, they're like they're related to gar. Gar come out of that group,
Gotcha. So they're what we used
so
to
they're
call
definitely related
holosteans
to gar.
then.
But they're
Yeah.
yeah, they're more normal fish shape than gar. But
Gotcha. Yeah.
uh, but gar basically is a specialized member of that group.
Gotcha. Oh, and Andrew says it might be a semionotid. Yeah. Very exciting.
I'm betting, yeah,
Cool. Oh
and
man.
I'm betting the big ones are a different taxa.
Uh-huh.
Because they named the little ones have been named.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows? They're what they've got. The little ones, are they growing to that big?
Mm-hmm.
Which would be interesting. But that's what those dinosaurs are eating.
Right.
That's where they're chewing through the chainmail of the big ones.
That's how their
They're
teeth
not
get
eating the
those
little
weird
ones. Like,
facets
oh,
too.
here's a little whole fish. They're not
Uh-huh.
even noticing them. The Megapnosauruses may be noticing those guys,
Sure.
but these guys. And we didn't talk about this, and Andrew
Yep.
didn't talk about the other day. But there are things that those sauropod tracks.
Uh-huh.
Remember we talked about that? We thought we had these sauropod
The big
tracks,
pothole ones?
but
Yeah.
Darcy
What did they
said,
turn out to be? I
yeah, the big pothole ones, fish nests.
think I remember this. Yeah. Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
my scenario, which maybe we'll get data supporting it or telling the world I'm an idiot. That's how science goes.
Yeah.
But my scenario is, when we start finding this stuff on the shore of the lake, that these big depressions, and having been a fisherman avidly for many years, you see these fish nests where they scoop out the floor.
Sure.
Seminotids, were they doing that? And I've been up at the what is it? Migratory Bird Refuge, Bear River Migratory
Mm.
Bird Refuge, where the Bear River comes into the Great Salt Lake,
Yeah.
and this big delta system. And of course, there's lots of gar there now,
Nice.
invasives in the delta. And they've got all these deltas where they raise things for the geese and the ducks to feed on.
The gar are
They do
invasive there?
many of these migratory, but
The
not
gar
gar,
and
carp,
oh, carp. Gotcha. Sorry. Yeah.
carp. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I know. We were thinking, yeah,
Yeah.
but these are carp I'm talking about here, and there's a lot of big carps.
Yeah.
And the eagles really enjoy them. We have a lot of eagles there in the winter
Mm-hmm.
picking off carp. But in the spring, I've been there in April, when if you're up along the shores of some of these things when they're flooding them,
Mm-hmm.
for the birds, there'll be so many carp mating and nesting
Mm-hmm.
about 10 feet off the shore that it's almost like there's a sandbar of big bodies, these are
Right.
big fish
Yeah.
withering, and they're half out of the water,
Mm-hmm.
making their nests and breeding with each other.
Yeah.
along the shore, so that for like hundreds of meters,
Mm-hmm.
theoretically, you could walk on carp and keep
That's
your feet
nuts.
dry.
Yeah.
So picture this with semionodids.
Uh-huh.
Every spring, the semionodids are in the shallows,
Mm-hmm.
so they keep away from those big coelacanths and things,
Sure.
building their nests and breeding and nesting. And the big theropods, like bear do with salmon, they've
Mm-hmm.
learned these behaviors, and they come down like the eagles and foxes and coyote, stuff, come down to the sides of Lake Whitmore to
Mm-hmm.
pick off carp,
Right.
pick off semionodids, and feed on them. And the reason we don't see prosauropod tracks is the prosauropods stay away from the lake margins in this breeding period for the
Because that's where
fish,
all the theropods
because there's
are.
so many dang theropods
Yeah.
down there.
Makes sense.
It's just like we'll stay a little more in the highlands. We'll stay out in the desert because
Just like,
we have tracks in correlative rocks
yeah.
of prosauropods, so we know they're there, but
But
we
it's
have
it's
no
like
prosauropod tracks
like where you
in
don't
the
get deer
site.
that are
You
hanging
know,
out near where bears are catching
yeah,
fish during the salmon run or anything. They're not going to hang out
yeah,
there. There's bears everywhere.
yeah.
Same
These
with this. Yeah.
behaviors are going on for thousands, tens of thousands, millions of years.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is my scenario for. So why don't we get prosauropod tracks in this site? And then because and it's the spring, and climatically,
Uh-huh.
that's the period of time when the lakes start drying out more. So you have a higher percentage of probability that you're going to
Mm.
preserve tracks.
Uh-huh.
You
That
know,
makes a lot of sense.
so
Yeah.
you're upping that possibility. I mean, this is just a total arm waving scenario, but I mean, Bacher's written whole books around scenarios like that.
And sometimes he's right. So yeah. Yeah.
But that's what it is. I mean, it
Yeah.
stimulates research. So, okay,
Uh-huh.
here's the scenario. What
Mm-hmm.
lines of evidence, might set the dominoes up to prove or disprove
Right.
that scenario?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how science works. You got to come up with hypotheses that make sense. It's like, well, sauropods, flew away that time of year. Well, Jim, they don't fly. I mean, you've got to come. What are logical sense of
Uh-huh.
what we know about animal behaviors,
Right.
and what evidence we have. I mean, one thing are those fish nests.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't proven that.
Sure.
I think they might be. Because just the setup, but maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
You know, don't know. I mean, that's another line of research.
You have to
Line
find a way to
after
test
research,
that. Yeah.
line after research. Yeah, you know. No, there's lots of work. I mean, people are, well, you guys are going to be out there, you do this, and then you'll be done with all the research.
Mm-hmm.
Huh? I mean, that a lot of the public will think that, you guys figure it out and that'll be it. As I say about this Jurassic Cretaceous faunal turnover thing, there'll
Uh-huh.
be people arguing over this 20, 30 years from now.
Yeah.
And they still
Yeah.
yell about Chaluxabub. No, it's that's not fair. It was still Decon traps. There's nothing to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and it's been 30 years.
Uh-huh.
It's not like settled science. I mean, like, okay, what do quarks do? I mean, a lot of science is still argued, for long periods of time.
Yep.
Oh, we just found an aspect of Einstein's, theories are correct. Good. Einstein was a sharp guy, but you still got to prove it right or wrong. That's
Sure.
how it works.
Yeah.
You just can't blindly say, yeah, everything he said was right. Did pretty good. I have to
Yeah.
admit.
No, it's a good point that like,
Bacher's done pretty good. You have to admit,
oh yeah, yeah. No, I
with
mean we
all
were
the things
talking
that
about
he's
this how
proposed.
a lot of his stuff, even if some of his ideas haven't panned out, the way that he was able to popularize dinosaur science had huge impact.
Hey,
You know,
what of his ideas haven't panned out?
I think for one of it, it might be the predator prey ratios in like being evidence for metabolism in dinosaurs. Like it's not like he's wrong about the dinosaur metabolism, but just we don't really
it
have.
I mean, it approaches. It's not black and white, but yeah,
Right.
that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is a ratio that you got an ecosystem,
Uh-huh.
and you got animals eating. I think they've got to be more herbivores than predators.
For sure.
But
Yeah.
is your
Yeah.
sampling like, St. George? We'd say it's
Hmm.
almost 100% theropods.
Right. Yeah.
That's obviously can't be, what's going on. You've got a food chain. I mean, Lockley used to always talk about this
Hmm.
since, so many of the theropod tracks, particularly in the early
Yeah.
Jurassic, are near water bodies,
Hmm.
puddles and lakes, it's where you
Yep.
get tracks. And it's like, well, but they got a food chain starting with insects, working its way up,
Hmm.
but it's like we do have, I mean, bigger animals, but St. George fish,
Yeah.
you
Hmm.
know, fish are obviously, in my mind, a big chunk of that base of the food chain.
Hmm.
So if you're, just looking at dinosaurs and crocodilians, you're going to be really like, this is nuts. Just, you can't have an ecosystem like this
Right.
possible. But, because we know these are factual things that you've got to have more food than consumers.
Yep.
So that was what Bob was getting at. And the numbers, the ratios, in the fossil record, rarely are normal
Hmm. That's kind of my point, is that
because,
it's not
yeah,
necessarily
yeah,
the
it's,
best way to argue. I don't know. There's
yeah,
collection
it's not the
bias,
only,
and
it
then
is a line of evidence, and
yes.
he was taking it
Yeah.
like this is it, but it's a valid line of,
Yeah.
I mean, I look at
Yeah.
Bakker's thing and it's like, I mean, Bakker's a theoretician,
Uh-huh.
you know, not that much of a research scientist because he didn't publish that much. If
Hmm.
you don't publish, it's not in the lexicon, even though it. The guy did my PhD under Earl Kaufman.
Hmm.
Loved the guy to death. I learned a ton of stuff working under Earl. Same way, theoretician.
Uh-huh.
Earl almost never published any data.
Hmm.
And a lot of his legacy is going to go by the wayside because the data you'll reference forever.
Hmm.
The theories, unless they're supported by data, I mean, Earl's stuff is not going to be completely lost. Bob's stuff won't be either.
Hmm.
But Bob didn't even publish scientific paper. I mean, Earl, publishing in scientific journals, theoretical stuff.
Uh-huh.
But the hard data, Earl rarely ever published any hard data.
Hmm.
Students did a lot. He had us generating hard data
Uh-huh.
for him, and we did a lot that supported Earl's theories,
Sure.
no doubt. I mean, Earl is often right. He wasn't always right. I'll say
Hmm.
that. I think I've caught Earl in more mistakes than Bob, but but he's a theoretician.
Uh-huh.
And there is a place in science for theoretician. Jack Horner is largely a theoretician.
Yeah.
He got like Denver and stuff to go out there and like
Do
collect
all
the
the
data,
stratigraphic
all
work.
the
Yeah.
ceratopsians. And yeah,
Hmm.
that stuff, but all his early stuff is all theoretical stuff made from observations.
Hmm.
Jack obviously had seen a lot of stuff
Oh
before he
yeah.
did his first books,
Hmm.
but Jack, like Earl, like Bakker, is much more of a theoretician.
Hmm.
And, but Jack, like Earl, when he's in Montana, all of a sudden he's got this cadre of slaves, I mean, students, to go out
Yeah.
and collect the data for him
Uh-huh.
and publish on it. And that's how this stuff generated.
Hmm.
Verricchio, some of these early students,
Yep.
Harry Schweitzer, I mean, but it's the students that created the factual stuff to
Right.
support Jack's work.
Hmm.
And some of Jack's theories, scavenging and Tyrannosaurus didn't pan out. Some of Bob's theories didn't
Yeah.
pan out,
Hmm.
Merle's theories definitely didn't pan out,
Hmm.
but a lot of them did,
Hmm.
you know, or were refinable,
Right.
particularly when you're the first person to put them out. My scenario for the nesting of the fish and stuff is a broad-based scenario. There may be
Hmm.
aspects of it that will be proven right, other aspects proven wrong. That's
Sure. Hmm.
how this stuff generates. But I have to admit it. The older I get, the more I realize, yeah, these arm waivers aren't necessarily bad for our science because they get all these people, prove that yo-yo's wrong. no
Yeah.
way.
No, I
People
agree.
were coming out like that with Tom Holtz, with Tarsalia. I remember the meetings when he was a young guy just coming up,
Yeah.
being at like after hours things where everybody's sitting in hotel rooms at 3 in the morning, and people saying that guy didn't even deserve to ever get a PhD and stuff like. You're hearing this stuff coming out of people. Yeah, I heard people say that about Martin Lockley at those kind of meetings.
Uh-huh.
And Martin was just starting out, tracks are useless. No reason in the world you'd ever want to study dinosaur tracks. Are you kidding? That's what a waste of time. He's a brachiopod worker messing around with dinosaurs. What right does he have? I mean, this is all stuff in my memory, you
Uh-huh.
know.
It's
I
good to
mean,
have
I've
that
been
kind of
around a long
perspective,
time.
like to
Uh,
be able to hear from you what it was like back then, and
oh
to
yeah, these guys starting out, it's like, people are, oh, I can't believe anyone would say that, and it was a
mhm,
bunch of other young PhDs of the same generation
mhm.
saying that, with Holtz. I like, you know, I never thought like that, Tom.
And it also makes
But
me wonder,
I
like,
was really, that's why you remember these things, because it just like goes right into the brain, just like, what?
oh yeah, how could you
What
forget?
is this person saying? A certain
Yeah.
person saying that, John Ostrom was a senile old fool. Where'd that come from? You know, it's like, you remember those lines
Right.
really well, most of us,
Hard to
it's like,
forget.
yeah,
It's
we're
just,
on we're on the shoulders of giants,
mhm.
let's respect each other, and those that came before us.
Right.
They're not perfect. They're products of their generations that they lived,
And
different worlds.
different
Uh,
scientists have different ways of contributing to the field as well. Like, I don't know. I
oh
was
yeah,
reading
yeah.
a blog
It's
post by Don Prothero the other day, about sauropod diversity, and he used Osborne's
well, that
Proboscidea
guy's a
volume.
joke. That guy's a joke. I'm so jealous of Prothero's writing ability.
He's
Uh,
incredibly prolific, like three
Amazing.
books a
I'm just
year. It's
so
incredible. Yeah,
jealous.
yeah.
I wish I
Um,
had a touch of that skill. Touch. Anyway, go
he
on.
certainly churns some stuff out. Yeah, but he was writing
Oh
about
man.
sauropod diversity. He was using Osborne's Proboscidea as kind of an analogy for that, and he was talking about how
Yeah.
Osborne, you know, he'd published all this stuff like minor differences in the teeth of different Proboscideas, different elephants, like different
Hmm.
genera. He's calling these based on really subtle differences in the teeth. And today nobody accepts that, and you know, Osborne was hugely influential on the field. He was apparently a phenomenal museum administrator, but a lot of his science
Yeah.
has really kind of fallen by the wayside. And
Oh yeah.
it takes all types. I mean,
Oh
he
yeah.
might have
Hearing
been kind of a
Colbert
third-rate
stories
scientist
about
in some ways, but he helped build
yeah,
the
Colbert was
AMNH.
his student.
Yeah.
Colbert, it's like me with Kaufman.
Uh huh.
I mean, Colbert talking about standing up on stage
Uh
with these
huh.
big folded sheets of paper,
Yeah.
folding out the paper representing the enamel links of various elephants.
Uh huh.
It's showing how the enamel links is an evolutionary progression that's linear, and as they speciate over time. I mean, it was all bull. And Colbert told me, he said, and when I was a student, I know that was garbage. But he says, that was his thing for so many years.
Yeah.
How the enfolding enamel on elephants was like a linear evolutionary pattern, that you could quantify. It's like,
Uh huh.
he had Culver sitting there like pinning up papers and just running them across the room. See how they get longer. This was, lined up for the folding enamel of elephants. And Culver was doing that when he was in his 20s,
Mm-hmm.
as a grad student of, Osborne's. It's great. It's great listening to these guys. I mean, it really is. It's like,
Right.
yeah, yeah. We're none of us are perfect, except the fact that we make mistakes. Just try to
Right.
be better. That's
And I
all you
mean,
can do.
I think growing up somebody who's obsessed with dinosaurs as a kid, reading all these stories about these well-known paleontologists throughout the history of our field, and then meeting some of these people and meeting their students and kind of hearing the stories from behind the scenes, hearing the, you know, the very human side of things has been really eye opening, and I really appreciate you sharing these stories with us, Jim. This is one of those things that I don't know, when I'm talking to my audience, when I'm trying to give them an inside peek into how paleontology works, I don't have that much experience yet. I've not published that much. I've done some field work and stuff. It's such a privilege to be able to bring you on and get that perspective, and I'm really grateful for that. Is what I'm trying to say. So thank you, Jim.
Now, I feel incredibly fortunate. I mean, to have my office next to Ned's for all those years, back in the
Yeah.
early 80s,
Uh huh.
in
This is
fact,
Ned
the late
Colbert that he's talking about,
70s.
everybody. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Edwin H. Colbert.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just him coming over, you get bored, because he was retired, and
Mm-hmm.
come over and just start talking to me stories, firsthand stories of Osborne, of Marsh and
Uh-huh.
Cope, and
Yeah.
it's just like, holy cow, you know, just amazing.
Uh-huh.
These are like firsthand stories.
Right.
You know, you know, it's just holy cow. Am I lucky or what?
Uh-huh. No, I
I mean,
feel
real.
the same way, honestly.
Mhm.
So
Oh, that's why I keep pushing that. Somehow we got to get Don Glut's dinosaur tales
mm-hmm.
digitized,
I might
because his interviews with Sternberg and
yeah.
Colbert and what's his name, Elmer Riggs.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that stuff's
Discover Brachiosaurus.
priceless.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're only hour long. I wish I had all the raw tapes, because he condensed them into 1 hour cassette tapes.
I should be heading down
Or
to Southern
around that.
California in September or maybe October this year for TwitchCon. I got to
Mhm.
contact Don Glute and see if maybe I can.
Oh, you should stop in and visit it. You should do a
Yeah,
live stream from his.
maybe I
I
can.
mean,
Yeah,
man,
yeah.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
Don, when you realize his history, of course, so much was
Mm-hmm.
tied to media, but also dinosaurs. I mean,
Yeah,
Dinosaur Encyclopedia, Dinosaur Dictionary. He did some, you know, very
absolutely.
important early popular
Bunch
things.
of the books on my shelf. Yeah, Don Glute.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, Don, and he grew up like next door to Forrest Ackerman.
Hmm.
You know who Forrest Ackerman is?
Not off the top of my head. No.
He published a fanzine called Famous Monsters of
Monsters of
Filmland.
Filmland. Yeah. Okay. Now I
Don
remember.
Don
Yeah.
grew up next door to him. So through that house,
Uh-huh.
he as a kid, he
Uh-huh.
met like all the famous people from through the 50s
Yeah.
making these kind of movies,
Uh-huh.
and stuff. I mean, people, wonder like, Don's always talking about all these old hack filmmakers and stuff but the thing is, he knew them all. He met
Uh-huh.
them all as a kid, and he was making films in high school and stuff. It's just,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
there's this film called The Sci-Fi Boys,
Uh-huh.
and it's got a lot of stuff on Don Bluth in it.
Uh-huh.
Back, of the old the fan days. I mean, he did a Spider-Man movie in high school. you
Uh-huh.
know, and we're talking like the 60s. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Spider-Man had barely been around, and Don's working on Spider-Man movies and things, and learning the trade, forced perspective. People that did the giant spider movies and stuff.
Right.
Some of them got ideas from Don's high school films that they
Really?
use in like giant bug movies and things. I
Uh-huh.
mean, it's Don. You should see his place. I mean, he's got all these props
Oh, I've
of the
heard. Yeah, I've
prehistoric
heard
world from the
stories.
1930s World Fair. And,
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's just an amazing thing. He
Mm-hmm.
used to have the time machine, from
From
the
the
time machine
H.G.
movie,
Wells, The Time
with the
Machine. Yeah,
crystal,
yeah.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
and did a video, Lost in the Jurassic again with his
Uh-huh.
band. It's a great song too. Oh, I shared that with you. You've got it.
I've got
You
that. Yeah.
know, you got to get Don to give you permission to play some of those on occasion. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I mean, literally, that stuff is, dinosaur education.
Mm-hmm.
They're priceless. They really are. They're just
Yeah.
great stuff, and
Uh-huh.
we don't want to lose, this heritage,
Right.
at all levels.
And I think it's really interesting in the dinosaur paleontology. We've got pop culture has got such an influence on it, and it has such an
Mhm,
influence on pop culture too. They're really kind of intertwined in a really interesting way.
mhm,
One museum that I think did a really good job of portraying this was the one down in Blanding, um, a museum
mhm.
that I didn't really realize existed
Yeah, well,
until I
that's
happened
Stephen
to be driving
Sylvia
through.
Zirkus,
Yeah, exactly.
of
Yeah.
course, and and he did his movies, Dinosaur Planet and
Hmm.
stuff,
Yeah.
chasing bikini clad women off of cliffs, and did a
Uh huh.
great stop motion Styracosaurus. It's brilliant,
Right. Yeah. We have that as
but
one of our alerts, and yeah. Um,
uh,
but they've got a bunch of original artifacts there at the museum.
oh yeah,
The original armature for the stop motion Brontosaurus from King Kong.
from King Kong, oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, and the whole
1933.
setup with the mats and things, so you can look through this camera and see
Yeah,
how the scene was done with all these different
the
mats
matte
showing
paintings.
different
Yeah.
things to give the depth for the jungle and stuff.
Hmm.
No, they got that's brilliant. I mean, and of course, Steve's been gone for quite a while, but
Hmm.
Sylvia is still around, and it's just that museum needs to be cared for. I wish it could get moved out closer to the main road,
Right. Yeah.
'cause it's
Yeah.
behind a
It is kind
hardware
of
store now.
tucked
But
away. Yeah.
the life-size reconstruction of Therizinosaurus with feathers.
Yeah. The things are
Did you see
showstopper.
that?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, had a
It's
lot of dust on it though. It's like making feathered dinosaurs.
hmm
It's like, man, how are you going to vacuum that off? All those
you
brown
kind of
ostrich
got to put it in
feathers.
a glass case. Like
I know it's
that's one thing that we
it's.
did in at Denver's museum in Dickinson, North Dakota. We've got our
Mhm,
Alvarosaurid there, Trirarchuncus.
mhm.
Beautiful, like life-size restoration of it with the feathers and everything. It's gorgeous. It won the Lasendorf Prize at
Oh,
SVP
excellent.
that year, but it's in a plexiglass case, so it will not get
Yeah,
dusty because
yeah,
you
you've
can't let
got
that
to
happen
keep
to
the
feathers.
dust off it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's just to keep up. That's the thing with stuffed animals too. It's
Uh
just
huh.
like maintaining that material, bird collections and things.
Yep.
Feathers are tough because things will eat it.
Yeah.
A
Lots
normal
of mites.
sculpture, nothing's going to eat your sculpture.
Right.
But if
Yeah.
you've got a sculpture where you put feathers over the whole thing, there are vermin that will eat your
Oh yeah.
exhibit.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's feathers, artificial feathers is what we need better, handles on for that stuff
Uh
that
huh.
aren't edible.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Things that could be cleaned better. I saw someone who did some great stuff carving foam
Hmm.
for the outer skins of, dromaeosaurs, and they carved the feathers in this fairly hard foam, and it
Uh
looked
huh.
really good. I mean, they weren't
Huh.
real feathers, but
Uh
it
huh.
looked really good, way
Interesting.
more durable, way more durable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I mean, that's the whole thing with me in my dynamation years.
Right.
You learn, to think about exhibits. They used to send me to museums and
Mm-hmm.
just have me sit and watch what people were doing and take
Yep.
notes. How long are they reading the signs? How
Mm-hmm.
long are they looking at exhibit? How long are they at those?
What
And I would
surfaces
plant
are they
myself.
touching? What are they leaning
Yeah,
against? Stuff like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
just record this stuff sitting in front of various exhibits,
Mm-hmm.
through the course of a couple of days. So okay, I'm at their Torosaurus exhibit,
Mm-hmm.
and they're spending time there. Oh, there's a kid doing chin ups on the horn. That's not good.
Yeah. Yeah.
But recording this, they're that that person sat there looking at that sign for 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
That person walked by, barely glanced at it.
Mm-hmm.
And you just had these. I had little checkoffs. Glanced at. Read. The header.
Uh-huh.
Read a lot. Put some real energy into the exhibit. But you get
Mm-hmm.
so many people in museums that walk through them almost as fast as they can walk.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's incredible. That's more than half of the visitors
Mm-hmm.
are like cruising through the exhibit. And they might be people that have been to the museum a lot, and
Sure.
they
They might be
want to focus on
season pass
particular
holders.
exhibits
Yeah.
that they really
Members.
like.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it just is striking, memory of mine is like how many people, are just cruising by these things,
Hmm.
and not barely glancing at them as they
Right.
walk by, and more than possibly be staff, no question. Particularly when you're doing this at a museum, you generally get to know who the staff are,
Hmm.
and yeah, it's pretty. But then you got people that they spend the day at the museum. They're reading
That's how I
every
like to do it.
sign,
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, and they're really looking and absorbing things. Or they're, some exhibits they spend longer at. Like, okay, what was it? Was there a picture in the sign? What focused them in there?
Uh-huh.
So that they dove in for longer. And that's, when people do a museum science degree, they never do exhibit. The person that did the exhibit on the algal roll-ups down at St. George for a museum science degree,
Uh-huh.
she would have done much better if she'd done a degree on looking at their museum, and
Mm.
what are people spending time looking at and
Hmm.
not looking at,
Right.
and make that the thesis. For museum science, that's what you want. You want people that
Sure.
understand what's working
What
and
makes a
what
good exhibit?
isn't. And
Yeah.
very few people in museums understand that at all.
Hmm.
They realize a lot of people walk through, so they say, we don't need any signage. Dynamation got
Some
into this
museums
thing
do
where
that.
no signs should have words in them. It should all be done with pictures and diagrams.
Hmm.
So, if you're trying to get across what an animal ate, you have a dinner plate with steak on it or
Uh-huh.
veggies, and, instead of saying it was an herbivore. It's comic, because they were
Yeah.
these like comic book signs, with just
Yeah.
little, and
It's
every
graphical. Yeah.
sign for every one of their robots was done the same way.
Can you
They'd
maybe
have a
explain
scale,
to the
and
audience
there's a
what
plus on one
Dynamation?
end of the scale, the dinosaur on the other,
Right. Yeah.
or a cat, or and everything. It was always the same thing. How big are they? Okay,
Uh-huh.
scale. Just drove me nuts. As a scientist, just you know, you can do better than that. The whole thing is tiering your signage.
Right.
Use pictures in them for sure, no problem with that. But have a big header. What is the main thing you want to know? The name of
Yeah.
the
It's like a
critter.
newspaper.
You know, you
You've got your
know, there's a
headlines, your
yeah, the
subheadings, and then your
headline
text.
yeah. And then you go into the deep, and some people want the details,
Yeah.
some people don't. And then in your bookstores, sell a book of all your signage, so
Yeah.
the ones that can want will read it later.
Hmm.
So people actually, they're putting more money into your museum.
Hmm.
It's like, why don't you do that? It's
Yeah.
like, that's just like, there's so many people that I've watched people that photograph every sign as they buzz by.
I've done that.
They're gonna look
Yeah.
at it later.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just amazing. But this is the stuff we need to consider. Like, how
Yeah.
do we convince legislators stuff? Because they're your target middle of the road audience,
Hmm.
that they're not thinking much about dinosaurs. People listening to you right now think about dinosaurs and paleo on more than, passing occasion, or they wouldn't bother listening to you.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
so you've got one kind of audience,
Hmm.
but how do we reach those others? And they're the ones that control everything largely. These guys can help, because writing to your congressman, writing to your, local politicians, saying, you
Yep.
got to support our local museum.
Hmm.
People just don't do it. They don't, you know,
A lot of
write
people
those
don't know the
letters, and
museum
they listen to
exists.
those letters.
Yeah.
They want mass emails they don't look at
Uh-huh.
in the file. Form letter. All of a sudden they realize we're getting the same letter from a bunch of people. They
Hmm.
stop looking at them. It just, you can't just like, oh, here's the letter, just put your name on it. That
Right.
doesn't work that well.
Hmm.
They figure it out after a while.
Yeah.
Works better than, mass emails and things,
Hmm.
but it's all these different things, how they work. And, guys, a personal letter to these folks, they do pay attention.
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and you can personally have a stash of these you can edit in your computer,
For sure. Yeah.
everybody individually,
Uh-huh.
that talks a little about themselves. And I live in this town, and make it so it is personal, but you can still set it up so you can crank them out quicker than
Hmm.
starting totally from scratch.
And
Computers are
I'm
good
I'm
that
wondering
way.
if we'll have some sort of an opportunity to do that at some point for the St. George project. Like it sounds like the bulldozers are going to be rolling in May
Yeah,
or
I
June.
don't know any way that that's going to be stopped at this point.
Yeah.
You know, the Utah legislative session just ended
Hmm.
last Friday, I guess, or Saturday.
Great. Okay.
So it's just a couple days ago,
Hmm.
and I know some of our guys at the survey are real happy.
Hmm.
So because we were in some financial things, but I guess that we got a block grant from the legislature
Hmm.
that it's
Hmm.
gonna really help us this next year.
Yeah.
So we're not having layoffs and things,
That's good.
which is good. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, it is. I'm not worried about me, but there are other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, any of this stuff, I don't worry about me about much of anything anymore on this stuff. I'm old, and somewhat irreplaceable in a lot of ways.
I'd say, yeah. Shoot, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, anyway, I don't want to eat up too much of your
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
I
no, I should call this, but yeah,
Yeah,
these guys can use the help of the public.
down in St. George,
Your
yes.
people writing letters, you know, giving Julissa a call. Do you guys have an address?
We
I
do.
mean,
We've got an email
Elias,
address that's there in the
their
yeah.
local representative, Eliason, has been super helpful.
Okay.
Elison, sorry, not Eliason. It's
Okay.
another legislator's been real helpful, but
Uh-huh.
Elison is the representative from that area,
Okay.
and he's on their board now. He just
Uh-huh.
joined, really in this whole crisis, he joined it, because of their needs and them wanting a curation facility,
Okay.
so they've got a friend in the legislature, and letters to him saying, if you need support for why we think it's important,
Mm-hmm.
people should know. Don't write a letter like he's the enemy. He's a friend.
Yeah. Yeah.
But ammo for him to use with his colleagues, isn't a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a good Republican that likes the museum.
Okay.
It's like, don't say, oh,
It's a
them
precious thing.
Republicans in Utah. No, it's not in Utah. The Republican Party is very diverse because
Mm-hmm.
it's like almost everybody's Republican here.
Right.
But we have there's as much infighting between, liberal, moderate Republicans as there, are between Democrats and Republicans
Sure.
outside of
We've got the
Utah.
same thing in California, but with Democrats. Conservative
Yeah,
Democrats,
yeah.
liberal
It's,
Democrats. Yeah,
the party name is only saying so much.
exactly. No, I know what that's
They're
like.
big proponents of education, taking care of their communities
Hmm.
is job one, and these are, we've got some good people in Utah government. There
Hmm.
is no doubt about it. There are people I totally disagree with on things, but there's a lot of them that are like, they're on our side, for a
Uh-huh.
lot of this. There are debates within the legislature, and this year was a hard year because of the shortfall.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, do you give it to us or do you give it to teacher? It's like, okay, it's you got to be real. We're curing cancer, but when times are flush, which are
Hmm.
often in Utah. Utah's a growing place. As
Sure.
Andrew told you, St. George is the fastest growing urban area in the United States.
Right.
It has
Yeah.
been for years.
Hmm.
I mean, they're talking in 30 years being 500,000 people.
Jeez.
That's why,
Wow.
getting this thing set up,
Hmm.
is more important than ever. It's going to be an incredible asset
Uh-huh.
for all the kids that are growing up in that community down the line,
Yeah.
and in neighboring communities, which are also growing. It's a
Hmm.
beautiful place. It's got a great climate. I mean, it's got 8 golf courses. It's a lot going for it.
Does get pretty hot there, but yeah. But I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm
Yeah.
really
Well, it's
looking
off
forward to visiting.
season.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the school year. It's the winter. I mean,
Yeah.
Dawn and Amy, Dawn. I don't know
Yeah.
if they
Yeah.
know Amy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. They've got 2 places in St. George.
Hmm.
One's an Airbnb. They don't work with Airbnb anymore. They
Mm.
changed management groups.
Uh-huh.
But they got like 2 Airbnbs down there.
Nice. Yeah.
One that I think one that there is a rental now. But they've invested in St. George,
Hmm.
and go down. Their Airbnb is, their off-season vacation home, down there. So
Hmm.
they just book themselves,
It's a nice
whenever
place
they
to
want.
be. I've heard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
it's and they're doing well.
Yeah.
She's pretty big in
Real
packaging
estate.
loans and things and
Yeah.
stuff. So but St. George is a place to invest in. I wish they
Hmm.
had better, urban planning is not a communist plot. Uh,
Exactly. Yeah. Same with like water management and stuff too.
yeah,
Like,
water management. I know
yeah. Oh
it's
boy.
they gotta change because there's gonna be axes held over St. George
Hmm.
over water because they do use a ton of water. They use
Oh yeah.
way more water
I've
than
heard.
most urban places in the country.
Yeah.
And it's just
Yeah.
like, yeah, you've got to go more the Tucson model, guys.
Uh huh.
Everyone cannot have a lawn down here, and we got to modify our agriculture in Utah a lot more than people want.
All the alfalfa.
Spray head
Don't get me started.
agriculture.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got to, Israel and China both
Uh
have
huh.
really figured out how to grow a lot of food with a minimum amount of water.
Hmm.
And people don't realize how good China is at it, but they're real good at it.
Yeah.
And Israel learns from China, but yeah, send some of our agriculture people over to look at Western China,
Learn
the
some
same
things. Yeah.
climatic belt, and look at how much they produce.
Yeah.
I mean, the Chinese were touring around, they looked at tropic Utah. We could feed all of Utah from this one valley, if this was in China. And I know they could,
Uh huh.
you know. I mean, they're so efficient, and it had to be because of the
Yeah.
population. But yeah, we have more water than they do. People
Hmm.
say, "Oh, rice paddies. That's only on this coast."
Yeah.
3/4 of China is desert.
Right.
And
Yeah.
people just don't realize that. It's a very arid country. It's and we change these things. We're moving. Geothermal in Utah. Hey, we're
Hmm.
the Forge project. We're setting a system the rest of the country's going to follow.
It's good to
I
hear.
mean, I'm real proud that Survey's been so involved with Forge.
Hmm.
Because we're reinventing how you do geothermal. In much more sustainable ways.
Hmm.
And it actually provides jobs for retired oil and gas field workers
Nice. Yeah.
because it uses drilling technologies.
Uh huh.
So you shift them over to working on
That kind of
geothermal
transition is
setups.
important. Yeah. Making sure that
Yeah,
people have
yeah,
still
you
got
got
the ability to
let's
feed
throw them
their
out of work,
families. Yeah.
and I'll completely new. No, no, it's the same technologies.
Yeah.
You're just drilling different kinds of rock.
Hmm.
But it's the same kind of stuff. Those, you know, you know, oil field workers, they just moved down to western Utah, but we have enough potential geothermal for the whole western U.S.
Jeez.
I mean, using these methods,
Uh huh.
you know, and the whole classic thing, tapping into a hot spring,
Hmm.
doesn't work because they're very chemically active.
Right.
So the chemistry of normal hot springs are bad. We just create our own water systems in the hot rocks from scratch,
Hmm.
using fracking. Oh, that's evil. Don't frack. Yes, we frack. We're doing geothermal. And you
Yeah.
do it within granite.
Uh huh.
So you're
You don't mess
creating
things up. Yeah.
completely neutral flow regimes between well fields,
Hmm.
to heat up the water, pump it in here, pump it out there, and it doesn't have all that dissolved junk, and you can just keep going as where the other things are clogging your pipes within a
Right.
decade.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like,
All the
because we
crowded in.
couldn't do it. We tried in this state for years. We have geothermal here. It's just wait, the pipes, you could keep the pipes unclogged. And this is a problem everywhere. It's the biggest problem, with using hot water, natural hot water to power
Hmm.
geothermal. Just get away with it. Make it hot springs. People have therapeutic spas. That's what you use that stuff for.
Right. Well, shoot.
Anyway, I'll let you go.
Yeah. Thank
The
you
future
so
can
much,
be
Jim.
bright.
What's that?
Yes, keep pushing St. George.
I'm
2 months
trying
more to
to.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you
no,
so much
just
for
got
your
to
time and
the drum beat. Keep the drum
yeah.
beat going. all times.
Oh yeah.
That's what it takes on this. And you've got other things that you're supporting, Ethan's work and,
Hmm.
various projects we're doing. Dawn of the Cretaceous National Monument.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot
Um,
to look forward to, and I'm
you know, it
feel
says,
really
some of
lucky
this
to.
is going to take a while. I mean, I think that's
Oh yeah.
inevitable. I really do, but it may not be in the next 4 years. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna do my best to make sure that I'm pushing for it to happen ASAP. So
Yeah.
if there's anything I can do related to Dawn of the Cretaceous, let me know as always. And
Yeah. No, I just keep the buzz once in a while mentioned. Yeah, this will
oh
be
yeah.
good sometime. When I see stuff on John Day, say,
Uh
yeah, this is the perfect model for Dawn of the Cretaceous.
huh. I
John
saw
Day is doing good stuff.
you
Yeah.
started using the like preliminary logo that I put together, the one that's just a
Oh yeah, I
prototype.
use it all the time. Yeah, it's a good
I need to
logo.
make you a
Simple.
finalized version of that, Jim. I got to
Yeah.
sit down one of these days and finish that. I have so many other things going
but
on, but
but it
I gotta.
really is, it's you got the logo things. It's a simple design,
Yeah, yeah.
expresses, one of the most common dinosaurs on those rocks, one of the
Hmm.
dinosaurs that's uniquely
One
abundant
of
in
your
those
dinosaurs.
rocks. Yeah, yeah. Well, I love them, but
Yeah,
people are you a Utah raptor? Well, there's a lot of raptors out there. And I love the sun behind it, and
yeah.
the shadow on the rock. I'm on the
It's the
rock. It's
dawn
like,
there, you know. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you don't want to complicate that much more than it is. That's
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
it's
You
almost
want
too
something
intricate already.
you
Yeah,
want a symbol. Yeah, that's pretty good. Because there's a lot to get across to
I can
make it
make some
keep it
improvements.
unique.
I will.
Yeah, but you want a symbol that you can pick up on from a distance.
Hmm.
And the colors and the sunburst, there's nothing quite like it out there.
I tried to
So
make
even
it
if you're
look, you
looking
know.
at it from a distance, like postage stamp size
Yeah,
thing on the back of a car, say in the future,
yeah,
you would say, "Oh, that's that," because
yeah.
there won't
I
be
want it to
anything
be
quite
instantly
like it.
recognizable.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the object with a logo.
So I'll make some tweaks and I'll make it even better, and
Mhm.
hopefully I'll do that before we go out to Dulling's Bowl this year. We'll see.
Yeah, no, whatever, and from there, because at this point, I'm not afraid to talk about it anymore either.
Yeah. No,
And
that's
the guys at
exciting.
work, I talk about it at work.
Uh
It's
huh.
not like this is my dream, and
Hmm.
I know it's going to happen someday. And the
Hmm.
guys here think so too. It's like, yeah, this is one of the most important things going on in the United States in dinosaur paleo.
Yeah.
You know, and, it's kind of inevitable. But it may be years. That's how this stuff works.
Yeah.
Building a
Yeah.
museum, 10 years. If you got a museum built in 10 years, you're cruising. You, you know,
That's what we're trying to do down in Fremont. We'll see,
St.
but
George was 5 years between discovery and a building.
that's got to be some kind of record outside of
It's
China,
yeah.
maybe. Yeah.
I'm very proud of what we did down there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the
It's
people
amazing.
involved, the Johnson family. I mean, we had the right people.
Yeah.
There was a lot of the stars aligned on that one. But
Yep.
5 years.
I'm really
Been in the
looking
business
forward
long
to.
enough to know what 5 years mean.
Yeah.
10 years is what you plan on.
Yeah.
5 years is a miracle.
Yeah.
10
Yeah.
years is good.
Yeah. No, I'm really looking forward to coming down there, and hopefully we'll overlap when we're there. We'll see. But thank you again, Jim, so much. It's probably time
Hey,
for dinner for you. So I should
yeah,
let you go, but
no one's moving here yet. We tend to eat late.
yeah.
But yeah, no, my job right now, I mean, I got to finish this Morrison revision for Capitol Reef. I really do got to get this. I want to get done before I go down there to
Hmm.
St. George. At least get it to my co-authors to work on while I'm gone.
Nice.
But yeah, yeah. And the Manco's book is hopefully we'll get it to the printer before I go.
Excellent.
Revising
Yeah.
the Mancos for Utah.
Uh-huh.
Now, I got a few bucket lists, and then I got to get back to working on the Morrison Ankylosaur monograph.
Right. Yeah.
Working on for almost 10 years now.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jim. I really appreciate your time, and yeah, I'm gonna keep pushing as hard as I can for the stuff in St. George, and yeah, um, let me know if there's anything else I can help with, and
Yeah.
we'll be in touch.
Yeah. Well, I'm not afraid to give you a buzz.
Oh yeah, I appreciate it, Jim. All right.
Take care.
I'll let you go. Bye bye.
All right. Bye.